What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Marvel as the Flash? The Fastest Man Alive. Part 5. If you enjoy this type of content, please speed punch the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Remember to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's get into the rise of Marvel's Scarlet Speedster without further ado. The fastest man alive, Fury. Too old for this shit. He was getting too old for this shit, Fury thought as he walked into his apartment. He had a 6-hour opening to get some rest, and he was going to take it. Although, when he opened the door, Fury was not expecting who was there waiting on him. It was late, and he only had time for a nap, not the time for this. Right in front of Fury was his sister sitting in his lazy boy like a queen in her court. Well, Jay, I just completed a 56-hour shift and only have so much time to myself. What is the issue? Fury asked as he removed his trench coat while also checking his security. And of course, she created a ghost zone around her chair, he thought to himself. I heard about that mission you sent my Benny on, stated Judith as she watched Fury from her location. Shit, how did she get that information? It was classified level 8 and up due to its supernatural nature. Look, Judith, he was the only power asset I had available. My son is no one's asset, Nikki. Judith screamed back at him. Sis, people were going missing, someone had to look into it. Fury spoke as he rubbed his forehead while taking a seat across from his sister. Hell no. Don't you dare use that excuse with me, Nikki. I know for a fact that this shit wasn't even on your radar until that council member's family went missing. I told you once before, Nikki Shield will never be anything other than those rich fools' attack dogs. This is why I left in the first place. Fury couldn't dismiss that statement because there were more American billionaires on the council seats than those of any other nation, so of course, Shield had to toe the line, but it's not like he had any choice. There were things that he had to do to make sure that he kept the Earth safe. Look, sis, I can't promise you it won't happen again, but the kid did good work. Of course, he did good work. He is my son after all. Listen, Nikki, I don't need you pulling Ben into your mess. He already has enough on his plate, and with his upcoming plans, I don't need his attention dragged away with your bullshit. Judith stated as she got up from her seat. Look, Jay, Thanks for looking after my daughter for me, Fury stated as he made his way towards his bar. He didn't even look to see the nod of confirmation from his sister. All Fury knew was that he needed a drink, but when he opened the bar, Fury wanted to cry. His 100-year-old bourbon and all the good scotch was gone. All that was left in its place was a note. Your doctor says it's bad for your health, and I'm happy to deal out justice, so deal with it. Jay Fury couldn't for the life of him figure out when she even figured out his doctor. Hell, he was sure that no one knew about his last checkup. SHIT, Fury guessed the only thing he was going to get tonight was some sleep. Nebraska, location classified. Natasha and her team were laying in wait for a passing convoy of metahuman hunter teams. Alfred had came to her a week ago with red flags about one of the extremist teams Ben had red flagged in the black servers. These weren't like the U-men that Ben had a vendetta against, but these friends of humanity, as they called themselves, were as bad as the others, Natasha thought to herself. From the reports that Alfred had sent her, they had a goal to round up any metahuman and to kill them. With the word going around about their killing metahumans, Natasha wasn't going to let them get back to their lair. Natasha was also aware that the group was trying to gain the Senate's approval to create some sort of metahuman registration act. Natasha was trying to avoid that by killing the leaders at all costs because she knew if and when Ben learned of this, he would fall on these guys like Thor's hammer and ruin his reputation since he lacked all kinds of subtlety at all. Widow, the prey is within the kill zone. One of the Zero Squad members spoke of the comms. On my mark, let's pin them down. Make sure that you don't hit the prisoners. Storm, I want those choppers down with the first sign of gunfire. Wolverine, be prepared to hunt down any that slip the fence. Copy. Storm spoke into the comms. Roger, Wolverine growled out. Natasha almost chuckled at that, but this was a combat situation, and even though her time with Ben and her family has curved her edge, Natasha's blade has never dulled and has become sharper to protect this small slice of life that she had claimed for herself. Natasha watched as the convoy slowly filled out the kill zone. There were 4 heavy-duty trucks within the convoy. Each of the trucks was old military vehicles sold at auction. The back tarp was repaired, and the truck was recently repainted with the fresh gray and green camo colors. They had 3 Huey helicopters flying overhead, also in the same gray and green camo colors. With the last truck pulling into the kill zone and the last heli pulling overhead, it was time to put all her targets down. In 3, 2, 1 mark. Boom. The choppers went down, while the engines within the trucks were shot out with the heavy-duty BMG set on a hill doing overwatch. Natasha moved swiftly like a tiger hunting down her prey. This was a solid black mission, and none would be left alive besides those rescued. She was on the first person that came barreling out of the truck. He never saw Natasha coming, and it wasn't because she was currently invisible. Natasha had to admit to herself hunting with her powers made her far more dangerous than any of the serums that they gave her back in the Red Room. They never saw her coming. The first guy lost his head to her blade, while the second guy behind the truck steering wheel lost his head to her silenced pistol. With the spray of blood, everyone turned in her direction, but Natasha was already under the truck ready for another group of assailants. With a flip one of her legs, she lashed out for another guard hanging off the side of one of the trucks. With her third person down, it was time for more hunting, but sadly, she had to find her fight somewhere else because her Zero team had already taken them out. That should have upset her, but being able to take out 3 herself while each of her team took down 1 each was okay. What she was more worried about was the hostage situation within the back of the trucks. Aurora was alive within her domain of the air, and she was finally out doing her part to help protect metahumankind. She always thought Charles's view and stance was nice, but it was far too passive for her taste. Now Aurora was out in the air taking down these bigots with her gleeful attacks, and oh was she attacking. Aurora then evaded the round of bullets fired in her direction and returned fire with a bolt of her lightning. With another push of her hands, Aurora shot lightning out of her fingers, blowing out the engine of the Huey as it burst into a ball of flames. A smile on her face, her next aim was for the other Huey turning as it tried to run away. "You shall not escape the hands of justice today," Aurora yelled out as she commanded hurricane-force winds to blast down, crushing the propellers of the escaping Huey. With a twist in the air, Aurora went to chase down the last of her prey. The last Huey was flying low over the forest as it attempted to escape from the kill zone, but Aurora was not going to let it escape this night. No, she was going to stalk it down silently like a panther in the night. Aurora dodged the trees left and right as she made her way silently under the Huey. With her lips set in a thin line, Aurora shot out her hand as she poured her lightning forth, taking down the Huey. Then as the Huey came crashing out of the sky, Aurora brought down another hurricane-force wind, crushing and blasting the wreckage to bits as she made sure there were no survivors. "Widow, all birds are down," Aurora spoke into her comms as she flew back towards the firefight. "Good, come back, Storm. We have already settled the issue here," spoke up Natasha from the other side of the comms unit. "How many, Widow?" Aurora asked as she floated her way up above the tree line. "One truck had 5, and the other truck had 7. Natasha replied over the comms, knowing what Aurora wanted. "I'm on my way back. Our ride out of here should already be on its way with the sound of the first crash." Robert Drake hated the week that he was currently experiencing with an extreme passion that he couldn't even get it into words. This was supposed to be his summer of escape and fun, but his parents sent him away to summer camp, or was it more his father's forceful nature? His parents knew how much he hated to go to that camp since he was 11, but now that he was reaching his 18th birthday, Robert wanted nothing to do with going back. Things got worse for Robert when he woke up in the dead of night due to his shivering while sleeping in one of the camp bunk beds. When he woke up, the bed Robert was sleeping on was frozen solid through and through. The bed didn't even wait for him to get off of it before it broke into pieces and woke up the other occupants of his sleeping quarters. After that, he was kicked out of the camp for being a metahuman. Robert had to go back home to suffer through his shitty father's abuse. But with his newfound powers, he didn't want to be known as the freak back at school. So he packed what he could in his bag and left to catch a bus heading for New York. Robert wanted to make his way to Salem, but he was captured before he could even make it out of his hometown. That was what pissed Robert off more than anything about all this, if he could only figure out how he used his ice. Robert believed he wouldn't have been caught, he told himself. They came for him while his back was turned at one of the bathroom stalls. The only thing that he could remember from the encounter was the odd tobacco smell that hit him before the needle pierces his skin. Robert woke up in complete darkness with the sound of booms overhead. When his body jerked though from the displaced, sudden disorientation, Robert found himself chained down to the floor, hardpoint in front of him. What got Robert's focus though was the sound of gunfire from the guards and the sound of booms from a distance. Robert took this chance to escape. With his eyes closed, Robert called back to that chill he felt that night. What he gained was a calming breeze flowing over his skin, and when he opened his eyes, Robert found that his body was all ice. Robert wanted to yell out with excitement on the discovery of the activation of his powers. Though with that one guard at the back of the truck, he had to keep his voice down. With a little more push, he was able to freeze over the chains that kept him locked down to the floor of the truck. But before he could do anything else, another one of the prisoners yelled out for him to unlock their chains next. With a curse, Robert held his hand up in front of him as the guard turned around. While he was guarding himself though, Robert's hand shot out ice, hitting the guard in the middle of his chest. Robert looked down at his hands in amazement as he was now able to shoot ice. Oh, this was going to be fun. Robert thought as he started to go for the chains, tying down the rest of the prisoners like himself. When Robert had broken the rest of their shackles, he began to lead his escapes towards the exit, but before he could open the flaps, they were pushed wide open. Standing at the back of the truck were the most stunning women Robert had ever laid eyes on. Granted, he wasn't certain of where he stood on his current intimate life, but the mixture of stunning figures at the back was breathtaking even to him. "Come on, the ride out of here is incoming," stated the white-haired one as she helped out the younger kids, but what gave Robert pause was the red-headed one. Robert knew that looks all right, she was eyeing him, but he almost didn't notice her from her standing behind the lady rounding up the kids. He couldn't figure out why she was looking at him that way until he looked down at his hands and realized that he was still in his all-ice mode. With a thought, he was able to release the hold that he had on the feeling he summoned to use his powers. "Good, now how about you come and meet the rest and tell us more about yourself," the redhead told him as she ushered him out of the confines of the truck. The sense of danger that had his chest feeling constricted was ebbing away and gave him a sense of relief. When he was finally able to get out of the truck, Robert found himself surrounded by quite a few people, but what drew his eye was the lady standing at the side with 6 arms. From around one corner, Robert watched as a man came walking into sight wearing an all-black suit. From the words, he heard his name was Wolverine. He still felt eyes on his back, but before he could ask any questions, he heard a loud screech from overhead. When Robert looked up, he noticed a sleek black jet landing on the grass to the left side. He had no clue what he wanted to do, but with the way things were going, Robert knew that going with them is the only option at this point. Nondescript party Gwen was currently on a date night attending some strange college party for which Jean was able to get them an invite. They had both wanted to wait for Ben. But with his earlier call letting them know he would be back home soon, Jean had asked him if he was going to make it back to attend the party. Ben had declined, telling them that he was currently busy, but once he was finished, he wanted to show them what he was working on. Although, it did strike her as funny when he told Jean to take her out and that she too should have a great time. Ben had the gall to mention that she was spending far too much time in her lab, as if he wasn't the one pulling half a month enclosed in his own. Jean began laughing at them as they went back and forth over the comms line, which was not helpful at all. But since she was now out with Jean, Gwen guessed it was a moot point. Alan had dropped them off at the party not too long ago and went to park somewhere out of the way. With all that out of her mind, Gwen decided just to enjoy the night with her girlfriend. Jean was wearing such a tight pair of jeans that if she bent over too much, the seams would rip along the sides. Jean wore a leather jacket that covered a tight shirt that would have her buds standing out if she didn't have any coverings. Jean's hair was in a warrior braid, hanging down past her shoulder blades. Her eyebrows were nicely arched with an amber shade of makeup. Gwen wore a set of ripped jeans with a matching leather corset, a sleeveless jacket that gave her already substantial bust an extra perk in the heart-shaped opening. To Gwen, this was now one of her favorite new shirts with the way it fit her frame. Gwen was looking like a tall, long-legged bombshell going out with her equally hot red-headed girlfriend, but she couldn't put aside the feeling that Jean was hiding something about this party from her. The reason Gwen was feeling that way was due to the fact that Jean was looking around the party. It was like Jean was searching for someone. Gwen knew that look and could tell that Jean was using her telepathic abilities to search for someone in particular. The look on Jean's face gave Gwen pause, and she wanted in on the action immediately. "Jean, I know you're up to something, dish now, or I won't do that thing with my tongue you like so much," Gwen whispered as she backed her girlfriend up against a wall as the party thrummed around them. "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, Gwen," Jean replied as she placed an arm around Gwen's waist, pulling her in. "I know you're looking for someone because of that distracted look you have on your face. So tell me, and I can make it worth your time," whispered Gwen as she nibbled on Jean's ear, gaining a soft moan from her girlfriend. Gwen knew her temptation was working on Jean. From the slight flush on her face to the way her eyes locked on her own during that brief teasing. Though even with the teasing, Jean didn't break and give up who they had come to the party to find. Before Gwen could capitalize, Jean was distracted by a passing platinum blonde walking by with a red-headed guy. Jean's eyes were following the platinum blonde like a bird of prey on her target. When Gwen turned around to take a better look at the girl, but she noticed the blonde was also giving them a look with a smile on her face. Then she turned around to leave with her friend. She was wearing a short blue lace spaghetti strap dress and looked absolutely divine. With a clear pair of heels on her feet, the blonde was showing a lot of leg. For a moment, Gwen wondered what Jean would look like in one of those with her hair let down. Gwen had to put that thought out of her head because that lithe figure was not the figure of a normal student. The blonde girl's figure was that of a gymnast, but the way she moved was like that of a fighter. Gwen had hung around Aurora, Natasha, and Laura during training long enough to notice the difference between a fighter and normal people. "Okay, Jean, what did you do?" Gwen whispered at Jean while raising an eyebrow as she pulled her back from following the blonde. "I might have used our systems to track someone down," Jean replied a little sheepishly. "I can't believe you used our systems like that." Gwen almost yelled out but was rapidly hushed by Jean. She kept getting away. "What would you have me do, Gwen?" Jean rapidly whispered back, but while she was talking to Gwen, Jean was using a small tendril of her telepathic ability to follow this Felicia Hardy. Alfred had told her the girl's name was in the file that he gave her once he tracked the girl back to the school she attended. "I don't want you to go off tracking down known criminals," Gwen whispered back fiercely, but they were gaining on a little group of people trying to listen in. Although, with the way they were also turning away, she could tell Jean was warding them from paying too much attention. "Come on, Gwen, where is the fun in that?" replied Jean as she began to pull Gwen towards the direction the pair had left. Jean was somehow able to track them up the stairs. Gwen could only grumble and follow Jean up the stairs. Although when they did go up the stairs, she heard a couple of wolf whistles which prompted her to smile a little. With slow, even step, they walked down the hallway in search of the door that would lead them to the blonde thief. Before they got to the right door though, Jean shot before her in a red glow as she went right for the third door on the right. Gwen had no clue when Jean started to display fire powers, but she would have to ask later because when she burst into the room after Jean, she found a blonde girl out on the bed. Her eyes were glazed over from some sort of intoxicant while the guy had his pants down around his ankle. The room had to be the guy's room from the look of the posters on the wall, Gwen thought as she looked around. The blonde was on what could be called a full-sized bed, but the blankets were all kinds of ugly. "You dare," Jean spoke with power within her voice as her hair floated out around her as her warrior's braid came undone. When Gwen heard that, she looked up from the patient on the bed to notice Jean's hair was more than just flame red, her whole body glowed. "Jean, put him down," Gwen spoke as she went over to examine the blonde on the bed. From her pulse, Gwen found that it was slow, but the girl's skin wasn't giving off any perspiration, so Gwen was certain that the girl was drugged. "You do not understand, Gwen, this wasn't the first, and he had plans to take a video," Jean spoke as she released the sense of justice she felt burning within her. "We can wait till she is back in full control of her faculties before we do anything with him," Gwen replied as she pulled out her to-go pouch with a few of her fast-acting medications. With a shot of adrenaline and something to help the girl sweat it all out, Gwen went to the little fridge and brought back one of the waters. The girl came out of her stupor quickly as the medications kicked in and the adrenaline sped through her veins, helping her body pump out the drugs still within her. Before Gwen could say anything more, the girl was already facing her assailant, kicking him right in the crotch. "Arrgh, you damn bastard," Felicia yelled as she kicked her now ex-friend right in the junk. She was happy to feel the blood flow from between his legs as she smashed them over and over again. "I don't think we should burn him, Jean, and since when have you been able to use flames?" Gwen replied as she pulled Felicia away from smashing the guy's junk into a paste. "Why can't we burn him?" Felicia asked as she rounded on Gwen. "Gwen, let me show you," Jean spoke as her eyes glowed with her inner fire. With that she walked over, placing a hand on Gwen's forehead, passing along the memories she gleaned from the knocked-out guy's head. When Jean placed her hands on Gwen's forehead, she was hit with the sight of a truly dark person's memories. Not only was he going to take videos, but he was also forcing 3 others to do his deeds with blackmail on them. One of the girls even had to get rid of the fetus because he kicked her in the stomach once she confronted him about her pregnancy. That was the final factor for Gwen's decision for her next words. "We can't burn him alive because that would leave a body behind. But I do have something here that we can use to get rid of the body." Gwen stated as she took out one of her self-defense prototypes. Ben was working on weapons with the Vega particles, but he had made a shrink ray gun when they watched the movie Megamind. She had fallen in love with the weapon at first sight, so Ben had given it to her as he went back to another one of his projects that evening. When Gwen had taken the weapon out, Jean had instantly gotten the idea of what she wanted to do. "You shrink, and I will burn and clear out the air," Jean stated as she went to the window double-checking to make sure the coast was clear. With a push of her telepathic powers, Jean directed the minds of all those within the general area to leave and go attend more important tasks they were ignoring to come and party. "Get your stuff, Felicia. We are leaving after this," Gwen told the angry Felicia as she started to shrink down the bed, the dresser and everything else that the worthless pile of testosterone had within the room. "Who are you two, and how do you know my name?" Felicia turned to ask the two as she watched everything shrink around her with wide eyes. "I guess they would say the cat's out of the bag," Jean replied with a smile as she sent small flame birds to erase the junk that Gwen went about shrinking. This new control over fire was new to Jean, but she was enjoying the flames. The flames she created gave her some sort of comfort that she didn't know could be possible. Intellectually, Jean knew she was only rubbing air molecules together rapidly to create the flames, but for some reason, she felt there was more to it than that. Jean couldn't help smiling as she noticed the widening of Felicia's eyes, but that was instantly replaced with a sly smirk. "Oh, so you're the Phoenix," and that would make her Wonder Woman. "I didn't know Miss Little Goody Two-Shoes was down to get her hands dirty," Felicia replied as she kicked her ex-friend one more time in the junk. "Well, my morals are a bit flexible, depending on the atrocity," Jean replied with a shrug while walking to stand beside Gwen, who was looking down on the unconscious moron defiler laying on the ground. "All right, ladies, let's do this," Gwen spoke, trying to hide the shake in her voice. "Do it," stated Felicia. "I'm with you all the way," spoke Jean. With nods all around, Gwen fired the prototype ray onto the defiler. With a hiss, he was shrunk down into a 3-inch tall person. Before Gwen could do anything more though, Felicia stepped forwards and crushed him into a paste. Once Felicia removed her foot, Jean followed up by burning the paste. Once that was finished, Jean used her telekinetic abilities to bring all the ash outside where it scattered with the wind. They had done it, and she helped them, Gwen realized. This was her first time participating in killing someone, and Gwen didn't know how she felt about the matter at all. Yes, Gwen knew that he was beyond a bad person, but it was still a life. She always thought she would be on the side that preserved life with her being one of the leading geniuses of the medical field. But today showed her she was capable of so much more. "Jean, I think we should go now," Gwen softly spoke to her girlfriend. Wait, you're not going to disappear and leave me here," Felicia spoke up as she placed her hands on her hips. "And what do you want, little Miss Spandex?" Jean stated as she began to float into the air. "Oh, please, like you haven't checked out my ass a few times while we tangled on the rooftops. Take me with you. I'm no longer willing to stay here on my own," Felicia stated as she took up position in front of the window to block their exit. "Jean, what does she mean?" Gwen instantly asked as she floated over next to Jean in the air. Though Jean was looking in the opposite direction, trying not to meet her girlfriend's eyes. "Oh, look at that, I was just notified about the Chiefs getting a new tub of ice cream," Jean spoke as she picked up Felicia with her telekinetic hold as she flew through the window. Gwen sent a message to one of Natasha's teams to come by and do their cleanup. With that set, it was time for Gwen to enjoy the sensation of flight and ignore that gripping feeling she felt inside. Even when I was out flying around the island, I had come to the realization that the island was roughly 5,000 square miles, but there was a major difference scanning from the air and being on the ground. The island was amazing, to say the least. The sights and the new smells were almost overwhelming my senses at first. The trees were exotic, and the flowers even more so, and I couldn't wait to bring my ladies here. That was easy to overcome once I pulled from the earth and felt it fill me, balancing out my senses. This whole new connection to the earth was going to need some getting used to, but I could be happy with the echolocation that I was feeling through my feet. There was a moment when I blinked right as my feet touched the ground as I gained a radar sense. When the radar sense pulsed out and came back in, my mind was giving me information about everything roughly 100 feet around me, and it kept on going with each step I took. "Daddy, where is Mommy?" Maya asked him from her spot in my arms as I carried her. "Sweetheart, I don't think you have a mommy," I replied as I tried to hide my frown at that question. I had no way to tell a brand new being about how babies are made, though Maya wasn't made the natural way. "Yes, I do. I can sense her connection to the earth as I sense yours," Maya returned as she pouted cutely in my arms. "Okay, princess, After we get home you can help Daddy find this mommy of yours. I replied with a grin as I kissed her on the cheek. That pond over there has what you are looking for, and the lily creates a portal through quantum tunneling. They can also be grown anywhere else on Earth, but you will have to set up a transition point, Maya stated as she pointed to a small pond that flowed into a river with crystal clear water. The lily colors were a mixture of purple and white, and they were beautiful. Although when I came close to one of the flowers, it opened up, and I felt a mental probe offering to take me anywhere on the island. That was strange, but I put that feeling down to the massive psionic power the island had surrounding it. I was thinking about how to carry the flowers back with me when Maya jumped out of my hands. Maya made her way over to the pond where the lilies grew. I stood behind her and watched as with a wave of her hands 7 of the flowers flowed together. From there, the lilies combined their roots together into a ring that could go over my shoulder into a sash. Once Maya was done with that, one of the flowers flowed up her arm to wrap around her head in a flower crown. Now her hair was bright flame red with a ring of white and purple lilies around it. "Come here, sweetheart," I said as I knelt with my arms held open for her. Maya's eyes crinkled up as she smiled, and I noticed that her eyes weren't the same emerald green that Jean had but was a bright green that looked amazing with her hair and skin. I couldn't even believe that I was a father with a child, but this was Marvel, and I wasn't going to complain about the adventure that was my life. Now with a flowery hoop slung around my shoulder, it was time to head home. With Maya, my baby girl in my arms, all wrapped up nice and cozy, it was time to go. With a hop and a jump, I was off into the air, but this time, things felt different. This time I was feeling the ebb and flow of gravity. I wanted to reach out and force my will over it, but this wasn't the time. I did a flip and brought my baby girl low over the ocean as we flew back towards the mainland. If I had looked behind me, I would have noticed the wake of water smoothing over behind me, but I was far too distracted with a smile on my baby girl's face. With us flying over the city, I showed her all the sights of California and the surrounding country. Before we were even aware, the day had turned to night, and we came flying over the city. My city, and the lights were beautiful. It had been a while since I was last home, and I couldn't wait to be back on the prowl taking down bad guys and stealing their money. When I came upon my building, I noticed Gwen and Jean were inside watching movies while Aurora and Natasha were outside on my balcony drinking. With a broad smile, I touched down next to my 2 leaders in spirit even though it wasn't in name yet. There were plans to change all that within the works, but before I could greet and share about my adventures, Maya flew out of my arms. Not jumped out of my arms but actually flew out towards Aurora. "Mommy!" Maya yelled as her hair blazed a bright red as she levitated out of my arms heading towards Aurora. That stunned Natasha and me both, but before I could even figure out my head from my ass, Aurora reached out to Maya, and her eyes flashed white and gold as Maya's eyes flashed white and green. "You really are the fastest man alive," Natasha chuckled as she looked at the stunned expression on my face. I wanted to say more, and I honestly wanted to. But before I could, we were both watching Aurora's face split into a huge smile as she touched her forehead with Maya's. Gwen and Jean came rushing out from my quarters, and that was when I noticed the platinum blonde behind them. "Why is Felicia Hardy here?" "Undisclosed private hoe." Emmy, that's marvelous." Raven hummed into her lover's neckline as Emma trailed her fingers down Raven's stomach. "Yes, it's always fun when we are able to get time to ourselves. So are you going to tell me more about this Benjamin person?" Emma Frost replied as she traced her fingers along Raven's smooth and silky skin. "He would be a great addition to the Hellfire Club with his connections," Raven replied slowly. "What are you really after, my love?" Emma asked, noticing the slight pause that Raven showed. She wanted to probe her thoughts slightly but knew that if she wanted to keep the intimacy of her oldest and longest lover, then she would have to keep certain privacy. "I want him, and I want your help getting him," Raven replied slowly as she prepared the trump card Raven knew would get Emma to agree instantly. "Okay then, but why?" Emma asked, prompting Raven. "He can get Shaw off of your back," Raven replied as she sat up looking down into Emma's eyes. "Then I will assist you, and I will also want in on what you're planning," Emma replied as she brought down Raven for a kiss as one of her hands snaked between Raven's thighs. The fastest man alive. The Talk Vega headquarters. I stood there looking at the stunning Felicia Hardy, but my vision was soon drawn to Gwen and Jean. It would seem I came home at the perfect time because it looks like they got into something way over their heads. I wanted to figure out this Felicia Hardy situation, but my women came first. Then after that, I will have to deal with my daughter calling Aurora mother, and then set plans in motion to set up Eden and check on the town of Salem. "Gwen, what happened?" I asked as I ignored Felicia and went right to Gwen's side. Jean and Gwen both shared a look, but then they noticed my stern look. "We might have gone a little too far," Gwen stated as she came into my arms for a hug. "Jean, what happened?" I asked as I turned to her, but Jean was looking towards Aurora and Maya on the balcony. "We got rid of humanity's waste," Felicia spoke up from her location, leaning against the wall. "Oh yeah, well shit. Gwen, come with me." "Jean, let's go for a chat, shall we?" I spoke as I picked up Gwen as I used my gravity control to pull Jean towards me. "Benjamin, we need to speak once you have finished," Aurora stated as she played with Maya's fingers from her location on the balcony. I looked at them a moment as Natasha also smiled while she pinched Maya on the cheeks, causing my daughter to giggle at her touch. "What am I? Chopped liver?" asked Felicia as she huffed out, trying to get some attention. "Look, little Miss Kitty Cat, you're in one of the most advanced buildings on the planet. Enjoy your time and pour yourself a drink, and we will be back shortly," I told her as I brought my two ladies with me into my room. With the door closed behind me, it was time to unwind. The first thing that I wanted to do was to kiss them when I first arrived, but when Maya flew into Aurora's arms yelling "Mommy," I was far too stunned to lay a lip lock on them. Soon as the door closed, my lips were upon Gwen's as I pulled her closer to me. My arms roamed her body. This helped me relearn the feel of her within my arms, as this was the first time since she improved herself that I was able to do so. I felt the soft, supple muscle underneath as her body displayed its strength in my arms. Our tongues dueled with the passing moments. Jean's arms wrapped themselves around my neck as she brought herself closer, and before I could recognize her presence, Jean had already picked us up with her telepathic grip and brought us over to the bed. As we touched down onto my bed, my other arm easily wrapped around Jean's waist as she placed herself within reach. Gwen pulled back, then turned my face towards Jean's as her lips locked onto mine, and I fell deep into my own kiss with her. That was a blatant clue, if any, that they were both sharing a mental link. When Jean's tongue rolled over my own, I felt the metaphysical knock on my mental defenses. As I let Jean into my mind, I felt all her thoughts and worry blaze across our connection. There was worry and trepidation, but also joy and a mixed hint of satisfaction. One of my hands was wrapped around Gwen's waist as my other hand was firmly on Jean's ass. I was enjoying myself entirely, but there were things to be taken care of and I couldn't be distracted now. Pulling back from our kiss, I relaxed on my bed, settling in for the conversation that I knew would be next. I was sure Jean was going through my mind, since the door was always kept open for her once she asked for entry. "So tell me what's bothering you, Gwen?" I asked while using my gravitation control to summon my tablet to my hands. Though her silence made me pause with the tablet hovering over the three of us. "We killed a person today," Jean replied to the silence that Gwen allowed to grow between us. Well, that was one way to feel all kinds of bad about something. Was he a bank robber, or was he a mugger? I asked the open air as I went back to pressing on the tablet to bring up slow, relaxing music. "No, he was Felicia's friend." Gwen spoke so silently that, if she wasn't right next to me, I might not have heard her at all. Shit, I knew who that was alright, and this could only mean we just rescued the original Felicia Hardy from the comics. That means they killed Ryan, whatever his name was. But she wasn't the Black Cat until after he had his way with her. Again, more proof that this world was so much of a diversion from the comics and the MCU movies that I knew. What was he doing that led to his death? I cautiously asked, because Jean wasn't having hard feelings about this, but Gwen would need the coaching to handle the situation. He was in mid-assault when we burst into the room to rescue Felicia. Gwen spoke up as she reached across my chest to curl her fingers with Jean's. "What kind of assault?" I asked, trying to clear it up even though I already knew who and what he was going to do before they stepped in to save Felicia. It was a carnal one in nature, but when Jean showed me the memories of his actions, I took it too far, Gwen replied. "Well, I think that we did the right thing and shouldn't mourn that bastard," Jean replied as she sat herself up and positioned her head onto my chest. "It was a living person, Jean. A living, breathing person. I am a medical professional. Killing someone is basically against what I stand for," Gwen replied with a little heat in her voice. "Gwen, I understand how you're feeling, but you also have to understand that some people are just vile and you can't save them all," I replied as I kissed her on the forehead. "I agree with Ben on this one. I showed you what he was doing and I would have wiped out his mind if you didn't stop me so quickly." Jean spoke up as she looked over at Gwen. "Yes, I soon noticed how fast you were ready to burn him," Gwen replied with a pop. "Burn? What do you mean by burn?" I asked, catching that bit. Before I could follow up anymore though, Jean held up her hand and it then burst into flames, which she then turned into a flower and then a bird of prey. Well, sugar honey iced tea, I exclaimed as I felt the power of those flames. That was the power of rebirth, and I had no clue that the phoenix powers would rear its head so soon. Flipping through my visions, I looked to see if there was a connection line going anywhere, but I didn't see any psionic lines going off into space. Although while I was examining Jean, I did notice a sort of inner fire residing within her. That gave me a clue, but I wasn't certain about the angle or the comic version I was dealing with. My hope was that I was dealing with the Phoenix Shard or the Cosmic Rebirth variant, not the crazy killer bird that they like to write about in the comics. I discovered this while dealing with the injustice that Felicia was going through, stated Jean with a very distinct way to her speech pattern. That would mean we are all receiving new powers, I stated as I turned my vision to Gwen as I squeezed her to me. When I stated that, I felt Jean's joy through our telepathic bond. It would seem she was also getting a kick out of Gwen's squirming. It had to be done. I stand with you both, not behind you both, Gwen stated with finality. True, but did we not have that little issue about safety measures when I messed up my own experiments? I asked. Sighing, Gwen couldn't meet my eyes with her next statement. I thought that enough safety measures were in place, but I was wrong. Thanks again for the rescue, Jean. No thanks necessary, Gwen, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. Felicia and Raven, what are we going to do with them? Jean asked as a smile played across her face. What about them? Asked Gwen as she leaned back over my chest. Well, I didn't have to read her mind, but Felicia is into us and now you with your return. Then there is what Ben did with Raven. Jean spoke up, giving away what was in my head. Yeah, we really do need to solve our current relationship situation, I stated. What did you do with Raven, Ben? Don't slide that under the table, Gwen stated as she perked back up from her spot on my chest. We might have almost made it to the two-person boogie, I stated slowly as I let that sink in for them. How far? Gwen asked, but I was glaring at Jean who was laughing next to us. I have heard bluebuds are tasty, Jean stated as I gave her a betrayed look. Jean, would you mind sharing this bluebud with me, please? Gwen asked as she avoided meeting my eyes. Before I could give any input about Jean sharing my memories as she saw fit, Gwen placed a finger over my lips while she and Jean shared a kiss as they shared my memories. That was a rush. Ben, how could you pull back after almost going so far? I felt that desire, it was so overpowering. Gwen gushed as she looked at me. I could smell the lust rolling off her body. She was giving off the same sweet smell that I was always getting from Jean, although I didn't need the smell as a clue because Gwen's buds were as hard as diamonds. My ladies are always first, I stated, and that earned me a sensational kiss from both Gwen and Jean. It was Gwen first, then Jean, and Gwen again, then myself. Gwen and Jean wrapped together for a moment. Okay, so what are we going to do with them both? Asked Jean. You're the telepath, I popped, stating the obvious. I already know what you're thinking, but it's still best for Gwen to speak her mind and not for me to share it. Jean popped back. And what about sharing mine? I asked. You're already very outgoing with your thoughts. This is for Gwen, and we should wait for her to collect her thoughts on the matter. Jean stated openly, then switched to her telepathy. We are connected mentally, so I'm always aware of your choices and reasons, but we have to allow Gwen to slowly become comfortable with her own skin. I am already encouraging that, but we have to allow her choice. Okay, we can see where this goes with both of them, but I will start with Felicia, and I will leave Raven to you both, Gwen stated, but I could already see plans and ideas revolving around in her head. I watched as Jean rolled her eyes because we both knew that Gwen wanted to try them on both women at least once. So what's the situation with Maya? Jean asked. She was birthed by this psychically active island I found, but I am thinking you're more asking about the connection to Aurora. I believe the connection comes from Gaia, whom Aurora worships as her patron goddess. With Maya being birthed from the earth, I believe she formed a subconscious connection to Aurora, I stated. So are we going to be adding Aurora soon? Gwen asked. That will be up to her, but that's a distinct possibility given how she and Maya reacted to each other, Jean stated as her eyes glowed while looking in the direction of the balcony. How will that work though? I don't know if you have noticed, but we are very distinct threesome, because, even if I had decisions on the majestic beauty, my hands were currently full. You're a lot closer than you think. Relax and be yourself. Aurora is from Africa and ventured across the savannah when she was younger. I believe she would like a warrior's approach, Jean told me as she turned herself back towards us. I will take that under advisement, I replied. but I had noticed a small quirk of the lips from Gwen's face. Yeah, they had both gone over it, but at least we are on the same field. Back to the original topic though, I won't be involved with any killing Ben. I want to be a doctor that saves lives, not take them, Gwen stated as she looked me in the eyes. That's fine, Gwen. Neither Ben nor I want you to do anything that's against what you feel is right. Jean spoke up as she pulled Gwen into a hug. That told me more than I needed to know, and where Jean stood on the whole hero and non-killing stance. Jean wasn't going to pull any punches when she faced the truly horrible things coming, and I was happy with that. Now I have to figure out my Aurora and Felicia Hardy situation, because I at least know that Raven will stick to whatever angle that she is currently playing. Though I would have to move up one of my plans, since Maya was here now. Having the island in my grasp meant it was time to build Alfred a biometallic body. Placing those thoughts aside, I mentally returned to enjoy the ministrations of my ladies. Walking shirtless out of my room roughly 3 hours later, I noticed various marks all across my body where they tried to place hickeys on my skin. I heard a wolf whistle from the direction of my couch in front of the hard-light TV, but that faded away as I pinned her with my steel-gray eyes. They didn't tell me that they were sharing a hunky piece of chocolate. Felicia quipped as she gave me a saucy wink. And you're the hot leather-bound kitty cat that's had my lady chase you all over the city, I replied back as I poured myself a tumbler of scotch. Felicia had gotten up and walked over to me as I began to pour myself a drink. So when I turned around, she was already standing behind me, well within my personal space. When I turned around, she trailed her hand up and down my chest, but I wasn't about to play into her hands. I was no comic book Peter Parker, even if the jeans she wore did incredible things to her butt. Pushing her hands away, I pulled up one of the counter seats and motioned for her to join me. Before Felicia took her seat, she took my tumbler right out of my hand, downing the whole thing. With a quirked eyebrow, she slid my tumbler back across the counter towards me. Tell me why you are here. I'm here because I want to be, Felicia replied with a smirk. Okay, so they rescued you, and now you're here, I prompted her, trying to not rise to the bait. That did get a twitch out of her though, because I noticed the slight crinkle at the corner of her lips and even as she tried to keep her face blank. Felicia replied slowly, yes, they did assist me in a way. And now you're here flirting with me? I asked as I raised my eyebrow at her. Oh please, Mr. Baby Daddy. I heard all of that out there on the balcony, and I noticed how you picked up those two, Felicia winked then continued. Now you're here without a shirt, as if this is just another day for you and them. Only a groan escaped my lips as I facepalmed at what she said next. I want the power and protection that being one of your women comes with, Felicia stated while leaning back in her seat as she kept on eyeing my body. Yes, power is a certain thing that I am sure you would like after that event, I replied as I pulled out another one of my tumblers and freshened up her drink for her. Sliding the scotch back over to her, I downed my own as I kept up steady eye contact with her as she did the same. That power can easily be yours, but it does come with a few rules. Felicia's face shifted back and forth as I watched her play with the thought of what I just laid down before her. And my proposition? I don't do prostitution. The girls like you for you, but we will have to spend some time together before I go beyond enjoying your company, I stated with a shrug at her. I was making sure to keep my voice even so that I didn't give away the girls were most definitely already into her. Felicia scowled a little at me. You're going to agree just like that? Before I answered her, I took a look at her from top to bottom. Felicia's long platinum blonde hair hung loosely down her back, slightly mussed to one side. She wore a tight-fitting pair of jeans over what anyone could easily call gymnast's legs. But I knew she was a rebel, and those legs came from fighting. My eyes moved up over the loose blouse she wore to look directly into her bright green eyes. Those same eyes filled with anger even if she attempted to hide it. Felicia had high cheekbones with her face sculpted by arched brows and sharp features. It was so easy to give in to her. She fell easily in my strike zone of strong independent women that can kick ass. But I couldn't think with my second brain, yet. Though, this kitty has claws. Is there anyone after you with whom I need to deal? Kingpin, Felicia replied instantly, and that really gave me pause for a moment because I had plans to use his drug empire for my own cause, but I guess he's a dead man now. Done, we can move on him within the week, I replied as I thought about plans to kill Wilson Fisk while also taking over his empire. Just like that, you're willing to throw down with the Kingpin because he is my enemy, just like that? Felicia began incredulously, stunned at my willingness to go to such lengths for her. The only thing I could give her was a shrug in return. I had plans to use his empire for my own ends, but if he is your enemy, then this is the end of him. You will find, Felicia, Being one of my people comes with my die-hard protection no matter the enemy. She gave me a leery look at that admission. What did you need his empire for? We created a drug that benefited people and came with none of the downsides the other drugs have. It boosts health with prolonged use. All the aches and pains any old person has are eliminated with the first use, and with prolonged exposure, the benefits go on and on. Why aren't you selling this to the world, rather than trying to sell it underground? Felicia asked with furrowed brows. The big pharmaceutical companies would kill it before it even makes its way to the FDA. So the plan was to use Fisk to sell a drug that makes the world better, not worse. It also falls into the whole philanthropist angle that Fisk likes to use. I told her as one of the hard light projectors popped up to show our research and the people we had on the NX5 Chi drug. This is a miracle cure, slight intelligence increase, faster healing, improved reflexes, improved immune system. Yeah, this would be dead on arrival to the market. Felicia replied as she went over the research and numbers. We need to separate Fisk from his empire if we are to distribute this on a large scale. Do you have a plan? The original plan was to work with him, but I have a few others that could separate the man from his empire. The one that will work best is a very hostile takeover and break him publicly in front of all his goons. I will set up a meet and greet later, but for now, let's call it a night. With that, I started one of my backup plans to call together a meeting with Fisk and his crew. There was an abandoned building project that was going on that we could use as the venue for the meeting. From there, one of my teams needs to set up to kill those that don't fall in line. Oh, so you plan to keep me warm tonight? Felicia purred out at me. I could only smirk at her before turning and calling Natasha to come show her to one of the empty rooms. When I called her, Natasha and Aurora came in with a sleeping Maya on Aurora's shoulder. So tell me, baby daddy, is the kitty cat sticking around? Natasha quipped at me as she bounded up onto the counter at my side. The girls like her, and I am going to give her a chance. We will also be making a move on Fisk later this week, so please prepare accordingly. Who is going to run his empire afterward? It wouldn't do to leave a vacuum after his disappearance, Aurora stated as she came to stand in front of me with Maya on her shoulder. Taking a moment, I looked at her regal countenance and my breath almost caught in my throat. For a moment I thought there was a divine glow surrounding her, but before I could answer her question, Natasha picked my jaw up for me. She is correct. We are already saving all the kids we rescue, and we are also running the Vega Industries company. We are running out of space, and we will have to make more moves to solidify metahuman rights. Since you've been gone, that president we bribed backtracked and is now plying the neutral grounds, Natasha spoke up, directing my attention to her. The island I just discovered will be our new main base of operations, but it won't be ready without the solar reactor project I am working on. But I can create mini-arc reactors if we are pinched for space now, I stated as I brought up more holograms showing the designs I had for the island. We will need to build a school for all ages and medical facilities first, Aurora interjected. I can take over the Kingpin's empire, Felicia interjected. Aurora and the group all turned to look at her. Felicia didn't back down from our skeptical looks though. I already have the connections. All I need is for someone to watch my back and I can be the person to handle the Empire and NX5. Natasha smirked at her while Aurora raised one elegant eyebrow at Felicia. I was silent though, weighing the pros and cons of such a thing. For one, it would put her in the line of sight of the hand, but a secondary benefit would be the creation of another avenue of revenue for me and my plans for the future. I was certain that Aurora was going to put her all into the island because it would be filled with kids and close to nature. Natasha was doing my errands and acquisitions. Gwen was on my medical staff, and Jean was the only free one at the moment. You understand what that entails, right? Hostile takeovers can get bloody. I can pull my own weight as one of your partners, Felicia spoke up, and we noticed the steel in her voice. Slow your roll, kitty cat, stated Natasha as she held up a hand. Yes, we are not saying you're unable to perform your duties, Aurora started. We would like to clear out the unsavory types first. I'm fine with getting rid of the scum of the earth, Felicia said with a shrug. You know, if we make this move, we're going to have New York more under our thumbs. Natasha spoke as she tilted her head to the side as she thought about what this would mean for our future activities. You also need to talk to the people we rescued from Freedom Plaza. Let's put her in charge of this plan, and I can talk to them now if they are still in the labs. Not tonight, Speedy, you have some explaining to do, Natasha stated as she hopped off the counter. Before I could follow up, she flicked me on the chest as she went and pulled Felicia towards the extra rooms. I watched them leave, but once again had my breath taken away from the Nubian goddess in front of me. Aurora had hooked her finger under my chin and then redirected my sight towards her as they left the room. "Let's talk about this child between us, my dear," Aurora stated while also tapping me on my chest. That act in itself sent a shiver down my spine. What a tangled web I have weaved. And yet there were no complaints here. We placed Maya in my room between Gwen and Jean, who were already fast asleep. With Maya placed in bed, we retired to the living room where I was able to get a glimpse of her sinfully delicious hips swaying side to side. Aurora took a seat at one of the two pairs of seating chairs I kept beside the couch while motioning for me to take the one across from her. I shook my head with a grin, but I did notice a glimmer of mirth in her eyes as she motioned for me to take a seat. "So let's talk about this unspoken thing between us," Aurora said with her eyes glimmering and a smile on her face. "How did Maya come to be? Why were you avoiding me before this, and what is this island that you will be using to build a nation?" Honestly, I didn't think things would happen the way they did, but I can't say that I'm not happy that it did. I began. "Yes, but what does that have to do with the connection between us?" Aurora prompted me to continue. "Maya was birthed by a psionically active island connected to the mother goddess Gaia, who is your patron goddess. Seeing as you're her chosen, I suspect Gaia had a hand in things," I replied as I commanded my glass from the counter to float over to my hands while also summoning one for Aurora. A tumbler of scotch was poured for Aurora, then myself. It was smooth and enjoyable, even if I could no longer get a buzz from such a beverage. "I can understand that might be why I have such an intrinsic connection with the child, but you failed to answer why you have been avoiding me," stated Aurora as she thought about the implications of her patron goddess forming a connection between us. "Let's be honest. I overstepped my bounds with the Chala situation. Yes, on the one hand I stopped whatever plot he had for that day, but on the other, you're a grown woman that can make her own choices. Once I realized what I did, I thought it would behoove me to no longer interfere with your life," I replied with a shrug towards Aurora. "And what about the designs you have towards me? Have you given up your courtship for my hand?" Aurora asked with one of her elegant eyebrows arched at me. "You're an extraordinary woman, Aurora, and yes, I have designs on you. But that's because I'm an alpha that has a thing for strong-willed women," I replied as my gray eyes met her blue orbs. With a smile on her face, Aurora smirked at me in a way that sent all the right signals to my brain. "I've seen lions with their prides when traveling the Serengeti when I was younger, so I will not spurn your affections. Living among the tribal people in Africa made me aware of sister wives as a young girl, but I do have my standards to maintain." Oh, that was a new one. She didn't tell me no, but she also didn't outright tell me yes at the same time. "Please do tell me what are these standards are, my lady?" I asked, trying to hide the mirth within my voice. "We shall test your knife skills in the morning. Hand-eye coordination is key, you know," Aurora replied with a saucy wink. "Breaking news. Tony Stark has been found and reported alive. The hard light projectors came alive, displaying the latest news around the world. The reporters went on to say how his escape was a testament to Tony's drive and that he was on a flight back to America. Well, hot damn. The Playboy was back, and that also reminded me of the looming stocks freefall that his company was about to go through. Alfred, make sure our accounts are prepared to buy up the stock that are about to be dumped with Tony's coming announcements. Also, make sure to buy up the subsidiaries that he will be selling that are connected to the weapons apparatus of Stark Industries." I replied to the air as I started to type away at my phone. "How are you so certain that Tony will be making those moves?" Aurora asked, trying to place the parts of my plan together. "It's something a man with PTSD and a penchant for the dramatic will do. And that's Tony in a nutshell. Would you like to make a bet on it?" I asked with a raised eyebrow at Aurora. "Yes, I would. There is a traditional garb that I would like to see you wear," Aurora replied to me with a devious smile on her face while looking at my frame in a way that would have made me blush if I could. "I would have worn that for you without the bet, Aurora," I replied to her as we both watched the news for any more updates. I was already typing away on my tablet to make my moves for when Tony makes it back and begins to shut down the weapons R&D division of his company. There was also the fact that I had to make a follow-up with Clau since he was spotted in Johannesburg by one of Alfred's drones. With Klau's head, I will be open to making my move on Wakanda, but I will have to find the abandoned prince first. I will also need to get myself a full-time secretary because to free up Natasha and allow her to be a SHIELD agent planted in Tony's inner circle for next year's mess. So much to do and so little time to get it all done. With those thoughts aside, I brought up the current team I'm working on. Right now there was Colossus, Iceman, Storm, Wolverine, Black Widow, and myself. Is that the current team formation outside of the Zero Squad? Aurora asked as she looked over to see what I was working on. It's what I currently have in mind, but I need more thinkers, and I also need to build our own version of Cerebro. I believe that the version that Charles uses isn't catching all the new activation of powers or people that were born with theirs already active. I replied as I flicked my wrist, allowing the hard light projectors to bring out the current schematics upon which I was working for her to see. I believe I can get the professor to give me a copy of his current blueprint, and then we can go from there instead of you having to build it from scratch, Aurora stated as she perused her way through my current projects. Also, if you already have the means to make this arc reactor, why haven't you built it already? This will be a great way to keep the island free of oils and such, allowing us to keep the natural ecosystem. Things have been busy, Aurora, and I don't allow anyone into my black server except for Natasha, and now you, I replied as I watched her eyebrow rise at the amount of trust one was currently giving her. I would like to see this island tomorrow, Aurora replied with a smile. The fastest man alive courtship Vega HQ. It was a lovely quiet early morning, since I can no longer sleep beyond a 3-hour stretch. After talking to Aurora for half the night, I went to bed at what I thought was late, only to get back up after my body fully recharged itself. Even though I was up at 5 this time, I was still up before everyone else except maybe Natasha. When I checked in on everyone, her location pinged in one of the sub-basement danger rooms. Today's breakfast was a leaning tower of pancakes, orange juice, bacon palooza, and scrambled eggs with melted cheese. On the side, I had fresh strawberries that I ran to pick up directly from the farms in California, sliced watermelon, and grapefruit, because the ladies would throw a fit if I didn't have any fruit at the table. I had the table set with a zip, but that made me pause. The size of my dinner table was almost the size of a conference table, and I had no clue when this thing was even installed. I made a mental note to ask Natasha or Alfred about why something like this was in my living quarters. Everything was ready, but before I could call everyone in for breakfast, my mother walked in through the door. I smelled iron wafting off of her when she kissed me on the cheek and made a beeline for my bathroom. Mom. Not right now, Ben. Not right now, my mother stated as she went into my bathroom. But before she could close the door, my dad walked in with a child in his arms. That caused me to do a double take. Dad, whose kid is that? I asked, trying to keep the skepticism of the situation out of my tone. It's my grandkid, of course, my dad replied like I was a moron not to have known he had a grandkid. No, your granddaughter is asleep with her mother and Alfred is still connected to the server since I haven't built him a proper biomechanical body yet. I stated, trying not to be worried about a brother or sister I wasn't aware of, and they decided to drop their kids off with us also. Incorrect, father, the little boy in my father's arms stated. That threw me for a loop because that was the voice of Alfred, for whom I had not yet created a body. My hands hit my face as I tried hard not to vent my frustrations with the whole situation. Alfred, tell me why you couldn't wait for a body. It has been a very informative experience being with my grandparents and interacting with society as a life form. Alfred replied with a plumb to his tone, like he didn't think what he did was wrong. What about the body design that we are working on? I asked my already troublesome child. Oh, with the marked improvements, I could not wait to experience the sensation of touch, and I looked forward to the intense taste of bacon, Alfred replied eagerly. Just wake everyone up and inform them that breakfast is ready, I stated as I waved him away. Don't think I didn't hear about me having a granddaughter, my father stated as he tried to give me his police glare, but I snorted at him and turned my back. Like that glare could work with a kid wearing a little piggy's outfit in his arms. With my dad ignored for now, I turned around to spot my mother coming back out of the bathroom. So, going to tell me about it now? I asked as I flipped another pancake to the side. She only shrugged at me as she took up a seat next to my father. Not much to say. I tracked down a tough hacker Alfred was facing, and he ran with a crew. Yeah, I can already figure out how that ended with the smell of iron that was around her, but with my mother alive, there was no reason to go hunt them down. While I was mulling over my small thoughts, I heard some commotion outside of my door, but before my dad was able to get up and go open the door, Dr. Otto came in with Rosie and Peter, who was wearing some weird harness. I looked over at them and noticed Rosie was ushering the two nerds in as they were going over whatever Peter had created, not even looking where they were walking. I tuned out the background noise as I zipped out for more plates and utensils, because it would seem that Alfred decided to invite everyone to breakfast, and I also made a stop to pick up more eggs and pancake mix. While returning to the hallway that contained my living suite, I found Natasha at my door holding Maya in her arms. That was strange because I knew Maya teleported to Ororo's room sometime while I was sleeping. The first time Maya had teleported herself, I had freaked out and followed her through the portal only to find myself in Ororo's bed. That was a sight I was happy to see after I had finished freaking out over Maya teleporting. Ororo liked to sleep in the nude, and I was sure that was a habit she picked up from when she had to sleep in hot weather. Once I had gotten myself an eye full of Ororo, we both agreed to allow Maya to spend the night there. So knowing that Maya was supposed to be in Ororo's room, it was strange seeing her in Natasha's hands with no clue of Ororo around. "Good morning, Nat," I stated as I kissed my princess on her chubby cheeks as I held the door open for them both. "I heard you're going to fight Ororo today," Natasha stated with a smile on her face like the cat that caught the canary. "Yeah, I believe it's a right for her hand if I'm not mistaken," I replied as I unpacked the items I ran out to get at high speeds. "And what are your plans with Maya during this duel?" Natasha asked as she sat down, but before I could get a chance to say anything, everyone was gathered around Maya. There was a feel of a murderous glare sent my way, and when I looked around, I couldn't figure out where it came from. "Why didn't you tell me I was a grandmother, dear?" Rosie began towards Natasha, and I wasn't going to stick my 2 cents in that at the moment. So I went back to preparing breakfast and getting the table set for the extra mouths. Though I was trying to ignore everyone and the background crap that was going on, I felt that glare again, but I was at least able to catch my mother shooting it my way before she went for Maya. Although I didn't hear Natasha deny her being the mother, like Rosie gushed out loud. With Ororo, Raven, and now Felicia, my love life was already messed up enough without the killer Russian joining the group. But that's for another time, not right now during family time. I heard some oh and ah, but I was really trying to ignore them until a freaking retractable tentacle reached for the plate of holy bacon. And I wasn't having that shit. With a quick slap, I turned around to tell Alfred to keep his claws to himself until I built him a body for him even to be able to enjoy the bacon. What I found was Otto with a metal tentacle outstretched from the back of his shirt. "Damn it, Otto, why do you have that on and using it during breakfast?" I asked a little too roughly. "Eye language. We have a baby here." Everyone shouted back at me while Otto continued looking a little sheepish with his retractable metal arm outstretched. Maya was in Rosie's lap while she had her hands over her ears. "I just want breakfast to be over with soon." Before I could say anything else, Jean and Gwen came floating out of my room in a pair of my oversized shirts. They took one look at everyone, then zoomed back inside to put on something other than my shirt and whatever undies. The table was set, and everything was going great when Ororo walked in with a fully mussed Felicia Hardy. Maya got one good look at Ororo before squealing out, "Mommy." Her hair burst into flames as she flew over to Ororo as she walked in through the door. Everyone at the table turned to look at me, and I felt like I was currently living in an episode of Maury. "Enough. We will sit down and enjoy breakfast and talk before we head to the island," I spoke, cutting everyone off. With that statement, everyone settled back down. Ororo smiled at me as she and Felicia sat down beside Natasha. I sat down myself next to Ororo. Jean took the seat on my other side, and then Gwen took the seat next to her. So it was time to clear the air. Maya is my daughter, and the circumstances of her birth are very particular and revolves around the island that we will be visiting after this. Yes, she and Ororo have a certain connection, okay? But Maya treats Natasha as a mom also. "Now, can we all eat? We have a long day ahead of us," I stated as I started to dig into the food myself. That brought them up short, and Natasha shot me a grateful smile. My mother stopped shooting me a glare and went back to talk with Gwen since she was the nearest, but I honestly wanted to know what the hell Peter was wearing and why. "Peter, are you going to tell me what you're wearing finally?" I asked, trying not to sound too put off from the weird harness he had strapped on with so many buckles it looked like it could be BDSM gear. "Oh, this is the gravimetric harness that I have been working on to complete a portion of the solar reactor that helps to control the gravimetric spikes," Peter stated with excitement, but I was more worried about what he was using to power the thing. "That looks like something out of those magazines Laura has been reading," Natasha put in, causing Peter to go bright red. "Wait, what are you using to power that thing anyway?" I asked as I finished my 8th pancake while reaching for another helping of bacon. Peter mumbled something that I didn't hear though, so I had to ask for some clarification. "That spare power core from your lab," Peter stated with his mouth full of food. That brought me to a pause with my fork in front of my mouth. Those power cores were the distilled version of my lightning in a bottle. That was a scary thought. Placing my utensils down, I closed my eyes and felt for the power core directly in front of me. There was nothing on my senses, and that gave me hope of being able to use my lightning for more than powering my gear. With some excitement, I began, "Peter, what's the marked variant that you're using?" "It's a Mark 24, Peter replied as he thought about it for a moment. "That was the variant that I had within a separate isolation field that I reversed engineered from the PYM particle to isolate it from the world." "Okay, so that's to stabilize the gravity spike that the reactor can produce. That's good, but why not repurpose it to create hover cars?" I asked Peter and Otto. That caused their eyes to go wide, and they brought up a hard light projection and began to science the shit out of the idea I threw their way. Before I could reply or even make more plans, though, I was distracted with Aurora pinching me on the thigh as she directed my line of sight towards the hard light projection of the TV showing the current news. The morning news started with the actions of Wonder Woman and Phoenix rescuing people from accidents and flying them to the hospital. Then it abruptly changed. I did notice some shade was being thrown toward Spider-Man, and I had to make a mental note to fix that ASAP. I figured I already knew who was spreading that hate, and he was going to get a rude visit from me once I was over with my week of work. The current view was of a Tony Stark walking down towards a podium with a jacket over his shoulders. I should have felt strange looking at a very malnourished version of Robert Downey Jr., but I felt nothing because I was all about the Benjamin's baby. I was going to make a power play when he announces his stupid decision and then rake it all in with the upswing. Although Alfred did ping my unit about some particular facial features matched between Tony and Peter, I should look into it later. There was no need for more money since I was already beyond any normal billionaire. With all that I had stolen from the secret facilities and with my profits, and this doesn't even include the market shaping that Alfred was doing for me on the side. Yet, there was no limit to the use of hard cash and liquid assets in overseas accounts or false names. Turning to face Aurora, I had a smile on my face with Tony's announcement of him halting all weapons manufacturing and production immediately. Alfred brought up the Stark stock beginning to plummet. I placed a few orders for Alfred to keep his eyes on Obadiah so that when he makes his moves with his own subsidies, I can go for the kill and snap up all the rest, increasing my holdings in Stark Tech. These are one of the things I don't have to worry about with Vega Industries being a privately owned company. Aurora gave me a nod as she ate as regal as a queen in her court, with Natasha almost carrying the same grace with her movements. Win or lose, I was going to wear the traditional challenge clothing, since it was something that might have been important to Aurora. With breakfast over with, we all went to get changed, but with the missing person going on campus at Felicia's school, we decided to call in one of the designers to purchase her a whole new wardrobe. Peter and Otto ran off back towards the labs with my hover idea on the forefront of their minds. I shook my head as I got my things together for the trek back to the island of Eden. Although I was ready to face my challenge, I was stopped by Reed Richards in the hallway as he looked me up and down in my current attire. I was currently wearing swimming trunks with a pair of flip-flops on my feet, which I had plans to get rid of once I reached the island. Meeting the man after paying all his bills and reading about him online are two different things altogether. For one, he looked a lot like the Ultimates version of Reed, and that worried me, but I had to push past my own bias. "I would like to thank you again for allowing us to move into your building to run tests on our powers after the explosion, sir," Reed began, but I had to cut him off at that thought. "That's fine, Reed. Just please don't blow up this lab while you're here. Also, I did ask you to call me Ben since you're using one of my labs." I returned as I motioned him to walk with me towards the roof, where I had one of the secured gardens located. Halfway to the elevators, John flew down with his flames out of nowhere. "Johnny, I told you no flames on the lower floors. Get down here, or I will douse your flames." I yelled up at the blonde gearhead as he flew around. When I said my piece, the ceilings opened up with the fire extinguisher systems following his movements. "Oh, hey boss man, heading somewhere?" "I can tag along and protect you," Johnny began, but I had to cut him off. "Yes, I'm going somewhere, and no, you can't follow for now, but I would recommend checking out Peter's lab. They are working on a gravimetric system for a hover car," I told Johnny, but that also got Reed to perk up. Johnny took off towards Peter's lab, while Reed was stuck trying to figure out whether to continue to talk to me or follow Johnny. After a few stutters, Reed went towards science, and I was all right with that. They can keep in Peter's lab while I deal with my challenge. Shaking my head again, I continued on my way to my secured garden. With the purchase of the entire block, I made sure there were multiple small parks on different levels, depending on the tower you were in. With Peter's creation of a new and improved quick-dry cement, it took a lot less time to build it all. My particular garden was located on the roof of the west wing, hidden behind a hologram facade, so, besides family and myself, others were not allowed access. When I got to the roof, the sight almost took my breath away. Aurora was wearing her Challenger's outfit. Aurora was in a two-piece outfit that would easily be considered a loincloth and nothing much else. Aurora's lower half was in a bikini bottom with a cloth flap on the front and back, while down both her thighs were leather straps and bands going down to mid-thigh. On both of her arms, Aurora was wearing multiple silver bangles denoting different things that I would have to make a note of asking about later. Aurora's chest was wrapped with the same leather cloth that she used for her legs, keeping her bust trapped to her chest, and around her neck was what I thought might be warrior beads. On her head was another one of the headpieces that she normally kept in her room, but besides the one that she normally wore. Today the one on Aurora's head was made of silver instead of black metal, and it kept her hair up and out of her eyes. I noticed a few light scars here and there along her body, and I wanted to ask about them, but I refrained from doing so because of the look of action in her eyes. Aurora was spoiling for a fight, and I was her target. Next to Aurora were my triple red-headed problems: Natasha, Jean, and Maya. Maya was wearing a child's jumper while Natasha was bringing out her inner Lara Croft, with Jean following the same dress code. Natasha had on a pair of black short shorts while wearing a very skin-tight black t-shirt, while Jean was wearing the same in brown. On the other side was Felicia and Gwen, but they weren't wearing a matching set of clothing, trying to give me heart troubles. Felicia went with the rebel girl route, wearing a pair of combat pants with sandals on her feet while wearing a normal shirt. Gwen, on the other hand, was wearing a summer dress with a floral print design. What they wore astounded me, but I couldn't focus on them right now. I had to call Maya over from her little entertainment of chasing one of the butterflies. "All right, princess, give daddy one of the flowers we brought with us," I called out to Maya as she zipped from one end of the garden to the other. Maya stopped halfway up in the air chasing the butterfly and came back zipping down in a blaze of glory. Her hair was wild, and she had a childlike grin splitting her face as she came to float in front of me. Out of Maya's long flaming red hair grew one of the teleporting flowers, which I was sure I left in a loop hanging from one of the chairs last night. Placing those thoughts aside, and the one about why the flower wasn't burning also, it was time to plant the flower. Before I could move to place it, though, Aurora was already there to take it from Maya. There was plenty I could have said, but I held my tongue since she was the nature goddess amongst our group. Although now that she had the flower, I noticed a location where she once was standing already picked out for the plant. With the flower planted and a wave of her hand, Aurora summoned the portal that could only lead to the island. A roughly 10-foot wide ring flowed out of the flower with golden and purple vines lining the outside. The event horizon had the same spiral mix of purple and gold, but you could distinctly see the island on the other side of the portal. Everyone took a moment to oh and ah at the portal. Then, with one look at me, Aurora turned and walked into the portal. I was sure there was some sort of connection with the island and her powers. "She is intense," Felicia stated as she poked her hand at the portal. "This is important to her," Natasha stated. She jumped to snatch Maya out of the air. "And you're coming with me, little one." With that, Natasha walked through the portal after Aurora. Gwen and Jean then placed their hands into the portal to test it out for a bit before both of them walked through. Felicia was the last one to stop and take a longer pause than the rest. "This is a lot to take in. You know that, right?" Felicia stated as she turned around to look at me accusingly. I could only shrug at her. "This isn't my fault. You're the one that decided to become a part of my life." "Well, yeah, the money and the glamour, not this super crazy hidden island and such," Felicia replied, almost reaching hysterics now. "What did you expect when you heard us talking?" I asked as I started to realize that she might be the only normal one in the group. "A private heli picking us up, and then we go from there, not a portal to who knows where," Felicia replied, calming down. "Well, we do things differently around here. You should have realized that with the flying baby. But if you want, I notified Hograth, our lawyer, to start setting up companies for when we do the Fisk takeover, and I'm sure there is enough paperwork to keep you busy until we return," I stated as I brought up my wrist where I had one of the test bench's latest creations. On my wrist looked like what could have passed off as a set of monk's prayer beads, but it was a state-of-the-art computer and hologram suite, all miniaturized with the use of the Vega particles. There was more power on my wrist alone than inside all of the Pentagon, but this was for only those in my inner circle. "Okay, fine, I will be the Alice to your Wonderland then," Felicia replied before putting a leg through the portal in a test maneuver, but when the portal failed to hurt her, she shrugged and walked through it. I guess the magic word for Felicia was paperwork, and I can get her to do what I want her to. I hope she realizes that taking over Fisk will also come with paperwork if she doesn't get a good assistant and delegate her work. "Alfred, send up a few of those quick construct drones I designed, please, and thanks. Also, we need to have a chat about the materials upgrade for your body soon." I stated out loud as I waited for the bulky spider construction drones to meet me in the garden. 3 of the main mother drones came loaded to the max with mini drones, and everything else shrunk down for me to build the first base on the island. With a wave of my hand, I ushered them through before me, then stepped in behind them. The teleporting felt like how I first teleported. A slight squeeze, then pop, and I was out on the other side. No muss, no fuss, and no puking my guts out like all those sci-fi shows. When I walked out of the portal, I was greeted with a stepping stone-type path that I followed. When I got to the end of the path, I was greeted with another strange sight. Aurora was kneeling in front of a lady, and everyone else astonished. Standing there was a very buxom lady in her mid-30s. Her hair was forest green with leaves throughout her hair. She wore a flowing toga in the colors of summer, and on her feet were hemp sandals. Her skin was a golden wheat color, and the vibe she gave off screamed motherhood to anyone with half a brain. "Oh, it's about time you arrived, young one," she stated as she looked at me from where she stood with a warm look on her face. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" I asked, not having a clue about someone being here on the island besides us. "Ben, don't be so rude," Gwen instantly replied to me, but before I could answer her the air rattled and I heard the leaves on the trees shake. "My name is Gaia, and it's rude of you not to remember my name after stuffing me with so much of your power," Gaia replied coquettishly as her cheeks took on the color of a bright red tomato. That made me weak knees, and I almost buckled where I stood. "Please, Lady Gaia, don't place that thought in their heads." I instantly cut her off, waving my hands to defuse the situation. Lady Gaia smiled at me, then placed her attention back on Aurora. "There is no need to kneel, my chosen," Gaia stated as she helped Aurora to raise from her kneeling position. "I'm blessed to have you here, my goddess," Aurora stated. Gaia cut her off before she could finish, though. "There is no need for that, my chosen. Just like there is no need to kneel before me." While this was going on, Natasha was oddly still in a frozen position, like she was caught off guard. I guess as a trained assassin since birth, finding something that would give anyone an existential crisis would do that to someone. Maya was floating around with her hair ablaze as usual. Felicia and Gwen had slight frowns on their faces, while Jean had her head tilted to one side in a thinking pose. There was no need to stand around the portal, though, so I ushered us all to move out of where we were. Come to think about it, where were we anyway? With Aurora talking to Gaia and the girls moving with me ushering them alone, I took the opening to check where we arrived on the island. The portal placed us in the grove right outside the front of the heart tree, right above the pocket that I used to connect to the island and awaken Gaia. With our location settled in, I had the construction drones set up and began to build the defenses to the island. I knew the island had its own natural defenses to ward away people, but phase shields and retroreflective shields to make the island invisible from space were things that needed to be installed. When I arrived back from setting the construction drones to work, I found Gaia telling Jean how she was the chosen of life. Gwen already had a bag full of new flowers that I didn't pay much attention to the first time I came, and Felicia was relaxing on a chair. "Why isn't my phone working here?" Felicia asked as soon as I reappeared. "Because we are on a hidden uncharted island. But don't worry, you'll be connected to the internet again once one of the towers goes up." I replied to Felicia with a shrug, but I noticed she was relaxing on a chair made of roots. "Gwen, what are you working on?" I asked, turning to my stunning nerdy girlfriend. "I'm testing these new plants for their efficacy in healing and potency towards the human body," Gwen replied as she started to set up her mini-lab from one of the utility belts around her waist. That made me take a second look, and it turns out she was in my lab again and was using the Vega particle utility belt. I can't even say that I'm surprised much, really. There is a saying that whatever you own, your wife or girlfriend owns just as much as you do. I left them to relax and went over to where Gaia was talking to Jean as they stood outside a new clearing that wasn't there before. The clearing was ringed by a flaxen hemp rope roughly a 1 foot thick going around a 12-foot ring. "Lady Gaia," I said with a bow of the head. "My chosen suitor and the chosen suitor of life and rebirth," Gaia replied towards me with a nod of her own. "I have heard you call me the chosen of life and rebirth." Jean began as she tapped herself on the chin. "Lady Gaia, do you mind telling me what that is?" "No, child, I don't mind at all," Gaia replied as she smiled at Jean while summoning herself a seat made of flowers. "Your namesake, the Phoenix, is more than just a name, young one. The Phoenix is the cosmic being of life and rebirth, and you, my child, have a shard of her power within you." "What does that mean?" Jean asked. It was the one question whose answer I was afraid to know, and with a thoughtful look on Jean's face, I was certain that she was also worried. "It means you can be whoever you want to be because you're connected to a cosmic force. It does not mean you will be any different. For example, Aurora is my chosen, but she is still Aurora even though she has a connection to myself. Gaia stated as she lounged in the chair. When Gaia said that I had released a breath, I had no clue I was currently holding. That was one of the larger things that had been weighing on my mind since meeting Jean back in our sophomore year. I ignored them to walk over to the side where Natasha was coaching Aurora on the up-and-coming match, which I would think was kind of unfair in a certain way, but who am I to judge? Although when I noticed the new look Aurora was rocking, I knew Gaia had something to do with it. Aurora's hair was now done in a warrior's braid flowing down her back, but what drew my attention was the lotus on her forehead. There was also a white sun on her right shoulder and a moon on her left. Her clothing had also changed to a more tribal-like design, and her feet were free of the sandals she had when she walked here. Around her head was a rope band, and around her arms were the same straps. They covered from her forearms down and around her wrist and knuckles. Aurora's shins and feet were wrapped the same way as her arms. The look she wore currently reminded me of a mix of the Muay Thai and traditional African warrior's garb. Her legs were lean and firm, and that but was a peach I wanted to take a bite out of. Hell, all the ladies around me were the perfect specimens of female beauty of all shapes and sizes. Although no matter how beautiful the other ladies were, Aurora and Jean stood out in a way the others couldn't. Even Natasha and her upbringing in the Red Room didn't give off the otherworldly feeling they naturally produced. Getting out of my headspace and getting into my battle mode, I took a step in the ring after I had enough of checking the two out. Once my right foot touched down within the ring, the world changed, and I knew this was Gaia's doing. Gone was my shorts, gone was my Hawaiian shirt, and with it everything was replaced with battle gear. My arms were wrapped in flax ropes down from my forearm to my knuckles. So were my legs from my shins to my ankles. When I looked down, I realized I was wearing an Egyptian-style loincloth that matched Aurora's. The difference was the lightning bolt on the front of my cloth instead of the green earth on her own. This caused me to pause because of the appearance of my new battle gear. The connection to my powers was also cut, irritating me. That is only temporary for the bout, Gaia explained from her location as she watched me with a critical eye. I looked at Gaia with the same critical nature because she bound my powers without my consent or terms. I would need to speak with the Ancient One soon, it would seem. There was a wolf whistle that drew my attention and ire away from the nature goddess though. When I turned around to see who was whistling, I found Felicia at the edge of the ring, very red-faced. Next to her still were Jean and Gwen with the same expression. You act like you haven't seen me without my shirt on before. I huffed at them as I turned around to walk to the center of the ring. Yeah, but that's low light with a lot of petting and kissing. Mama wanna feast on a hunk right now, Jean replied to me telepathically as I stood at the center of the ring. At the center of the ring had two daggers. Each dagger was roughly 1.5 feet long. The handle of the blade carried a panther engraving which I was sure was hinting at the ancestors that also connected her to the sorcerer supreme named Aisha. Or it could just be one of the Vishanti, and I was overthinking things. I took the dagger facing me while taking 5 steps back from the center ring. Aurora turned around once I began to check my own straps while Natasha walked around to join the rest of the ladies. From the way she walked, Aurora was on the prowl, and when our eyes met, the inner fire in her eyes gave me a shiver of excitement that I had to clamp down. Aurora drew the dagger left for her and twirled it around her fingers in such a way that screamed expert. With her blade in hand, Aurora took a few steps back herself. We both twirled the blade into a backhanded grip and settled into our stances. I was already settled into my powers, so I was pretty ambidextrous while Aurora was a righty. From the way Aurora stood though, it would have been hard for anyone to tell. All her gaps in her defense were hidden, and it felt similar to when I faced Logan during any other training session. There was a lull of silence as we both stood there watching each other. Then, as if we had a prior agreement, we both dashed forward. Natasha was feeling more than just her mortality right now. She had killed because she was raised to and killed because she wanted to, and during all her time, Natasha never felt any regrets. Now here she was facing Mother Goddess from what she could see. And now her world was feeling just that much smaller, and Natasha wasn't happy with that at all. Natasha prided herself on always being prepared, but ever since she met Benjamin, all her preparations flew out the window. Natasha found herself having to formulate and learn things about the world of powers, as she had come to call it. Yet with all her preparations, she found herself standing next to the Mother Goddess herself as she watched about between a person she considered a little brother and another she had come to respect. "Child, what have they done to you?" Gaia spoke up as she looked from the fight to Natasha. "Lady Gaia, I don't understand." Natasha asked, trying to piece together what the Mother of the Earth was talking about. With a wave of her hands, Gaia picked up Natasha and brought her closer. Natasha reflexively brought out her hidden Ruger SR-22, aiming directly for Gaia. "That's unnecessary," Gaia stated as she waved a finger, sending away the pistol within Natasha's hands. "Lady Gaia, why?" Jean began but was silenced with a wave from Gaia, the Elder Goddess. "Just helping to fix a problem," Gaia stated as one of her hands began to glow a soft green. With the glowing hand, she placed it over the lower abdomen of struggling Natasha. "Relax, young one. There is no need for me to harm a companion of my chosen." Natasha wanted to, but she couldn't relax with the current situation she was in. This situation was all too familiar to the restraints she went through in the Red Room. The very act reminded Natasha of the Red Room and what they did with her body against her will. She felt the warmth in her systems, though. Natasha felt it as the warmth spread from her lower abdomen. Natasha was sure she felt something there that should not have been, something she knew was impossible. Natasha knew that the only way Ben had figured out to heal such a wound was with the extremists because of its nature to rewrite the human body. Natasha had seen his research on the black servers, and even that one being done by Kurt Connors. That serum was strictly restricted because of its nature to turn a person into a humanoid lizard. That serum was dangerous, as the extremists liked to blow up people. So Natasha knew that what Gaia might have done was impossible, or what she thought was impossible. Shit, every time she felt like she had a handle on things, something else changed. Healing her or not, Natasha vowed to find a way to oppose another person that could summon her against her will telepathically or otherwise. "You're healed now, young one," Gaia stated as she placed Natasha back on the ground. Before she would reply, Gwen was at Natasha's side running scans up and down her body to make sure there was no damage done. Natasha already knew what Gaia had done for her, but a second opinion wouldn't hurt to hear. "Eden, Paradise Lost Aurora and I clashed mid-ring fist to fist as we battled it out like a well-choreographed fight. With each kick, punch, and swing, Aurora and I dodged blow after blow as we tried to counter each other, searching for the upper hand. Aurora gained the upper hand as one of her legs moved into my stance. She struck with an elbow to my chest as she turned to lash me in the face with her braid. I took the stumble back as I lashed out and kicked Aurora in the chest with my leg. That gave me the space to flip and right myself back into a ready stance. Along my right arm, I had a few nicks here and there from the dagger in Aurora's hands. I couldn't lie, Aurora's skills with the blade was on par with Natasha's, and she was raised as a killing machine. Granted, Aurora grew up in the street of Egypt, so she had to have at least survived somehow. We were both back into the fight, and I went for a low sweep which Aurora jumped right over with a flip, bringing her heel down on me. Using my left hand, I grabbed her by the ankle, shifting it to the side, but Aurora was already onto me. With a twist, Aurora's other foot came around, flying towards my face, forcing me to let go of the ankle. I was already back up with a knee heading right for her face when Aurora spun to the side with her dagger forward, aiming right for my hip. I stuck my hand out in front of the blade, taking the blow to my palm. Ignoring the sting of the blade, I lashed out with my left, hoping to backhand her way, but Aurora had clamped down on my forearm and drove me to the ground. Again I was on the ground, but this wasn't the first time I found myself here. I did a swift hip up, forcing Aurora up and over my head, forcing her away from me. Aurora lightly sprung away, swapping out her own dagger for my own as she rolled away. "You know, most men would have given up by now," Aurora stated as she talked, pacing back and forth from her location. "Yeah, but only I know the true worth of what I'm fighting for," I replied as I pulled the dagger out of my palm. "Oh, and pre-tell what's that you're fighting for?" Aurora asked as she paused for a moment before launching herself back at me. "A partner," I began as I blocked a punch aimed for my solar plexus. "An equal," I said as I twisted the dagger, nicking Aurora on her left. "In all things," I released as I took a kick to the face from Aurora. "Then I shall accept your courtship," Aurora replied as she flicked the dagger back towards the center of the ring. "I'm no broodmare, nor am I a trophy. You can have faith in me, my lady, that will not be an issue. I value you for your brains, not your bloodline or connections," I replied with a smile as I tossed my own dagger to the center ring. I held my hand out to Aurora as I took a step outside the ring and began to levitate. "I believe a flight around the island is in order, my lady." My headband disappeared, and so did the wraps, but I kept the Egyptian cloth around my waist as I floated there waiting for her, but I didn't have to wait long. With a smile, Aurora joined me in the air with Maya was right behind her. With flaming red and white, we took towards the sky. The fastest man alive unknown Xavier's school of gifted youngsters Charles sat on one of his school's many balconies as he watched over the exercise drills being led by Logan. On some days it still surprised him, waking up to find his school filled with youths. The only thing that brought him down today was the new presence he felt driving onto his property. Charles felt the mind of a young female, accompanied by a familiar mind. The mental shields reminded Charles of someone, but he couldn't place the face. With a few taps on the side of his chair, Charles brought up the front camera at the gate before the person he felt buzzed in. What he found was a lady and her daughter sitting in the car as they waited for the gate. The daughter had a weird hairstyle of white highlights on brown hair, but her features carried the same air of nobility as her mother. Buzz with the gate buzzed in to open. Charles couldn't wait to find out why this person felt so familiar, but he would have to temper his excitement with the teenager that might be attending his school. With Logan busy watching over the students, Charles sent out a telepathic call to Dr. Kenny, who was currently in the labs with Hank discussing their various findings pertaining to the X gene. When Charles reached the front foyer, he found Laura waiting on the railing behind as her mother fussed over her choice of clothing. Laura was currently wearing leather pants with plenty of buckles to match her dark blue shirt and black lip gloss. The good Dr. Kenny was in her normal lab coat that she always wore with a small ketchup stain on the left lapel. Charles chuckled to himself as he watched the mother-daughter pair. "Good morning," Charles stated as he greeted the mother-daughter pair as he rolled his chair up towards the door. Laura turned around to nod towards him, and that reminded Charles of Logan and his mannerisms. "Morning, Charles. Are we getting another student?" Dr. Kenny asked as she opened the door for them to receive the approaching vehicle. "I believe so, but there is something about the older female that I believe I'm familiar with, but I can't place the face," Charles replied to Dr. Kenny as they watched the pair step out of the vehicle. "Ah, Charles, you're up early. I'm sorry, but do I know you?" replied Charles as he tried to place the face without breaching her privacy by reading her mind. "Oh, I guess it has been a while since I last showed my true face without the blue. Raven, what are you doing here?" Charles asked calmly while using his mind to reach out for Eric or Sabretooth and any of the other backups Raven liked to use. "I'm here to admit my daughter to your school. Why else would I come here, Charles?" Raven replied with her nose upturned towards Charles. "That's fine. But what about your situation with Eric?" Charles couldn't help but ask. "Don't worry about him or my situation. Can she learn here or not?" Raven asked as she began to tap her foot. Yes, everyone is welcomed," Charles replied as he turned towards the young lady. "May I get your name, young lady? Also, do you mind sharing what your abilities are?" "The name's Rouge and I absorb power," Anna replied to the professor. "That's a unique name and ability," replied Charles while he looked towards Raven for more information from the young lady. "Thanks, Charles. I will be in contact with you after I get back to the company," Raven replied as she turned to leave out the door. "You're actually working?" Charles asked incredulously. "I'm more than working, Charles, I'm making a change." "Rouge, sweetheart, I'll pick you up at 5. Raven replied as she got back into her car and abruptly left, driving down the paveway. Charles turned a quizzical eye towards Rouge and the rest, but all he received was a shrug from the young lady. "She does that often. So tell me more about yourself, old man." "All my ma told me was that this was a school for kids with powers like myself," Rouge replied as she folded her arms across her chest. "Well, where do we begin?" replied Charles with a smile at the young Rouge. Peter was in his lab, having the time of his life. Not only was he creating groundbreaking technology, but he was also science jamming with two of the greatest minds known to man. Dr. Otto was a man known for his pioneering research in mechanical engineering, but had a passion for thermonuclear physics. Then there was the other Mr. Richards, also known to push beyond the boundary of what's known in physics, and they were both here in his lab. Last but not least was Johnny Storm, another mechanical engineering genius, but closer to his age. Other than the marvel of working with such people, Peter found himself trying hard to talk Johnny out of adding a flamethrower into the designs on the hover car. "Come on, Peter, look at it. Flamethrower," Johnny exclaimed as he brought up a quick design of a high-yield, low-power consumption, spark and a flame emitter that he just created for the front bumper of the vehicle. "Johnny, this isn't a car for you. This is a car for..." "Well, I'm not sure who Ben wants me to design this car for," Peter replied as he scratched his head. "I believe we should just make something and then go from there. For instance, I built these exoskeletal arms of mine to help control the electromagnetic pulses that the solar reactor creates, but the designs double as advanced prosthetics," Dr. Otto stated as he used one of his 6 arms to summon a blank hollow sheet. "Those are fascinating. but I'm more interested in this power source that you're currently using. Tell me, Peter, you said you created a new method along the lines of quantum physics to isolate this particle that you have housed in a stasis field. I believe I have a few methods to better stabilize it. Reed spoke as he began to take apart the reactor housing. I can ask Ben about who the car is for later. For now, let's just create something spectacular. Peter replied to Dr. Otto while erasing the flamethrower from the designs for the third time. But this time the designs did give Peter a spark of an idea about moving forward with the propulsion system. A tachyon particle generator would work great as the main propulsion and with a thruster system in the atmosphere as well as outer space, but would also allow for clean usage in the atmosphere and provide an energy source for weapons fire. Peter thought to himself as his ideas came together in his mind. Hey Pete, I'm trying to call Big Ben, but I can't reach him, stated Johnny from one of the workstations. Without looking up, Peter replied. That's because he is in one of the danger rooms, Johnny. What's a danger room? Johnny asked as he pushed aside all the work he was doing to hone in on the danger aspect of the conversation. Unfortunately for Johnny, Peter was far too busy in his designs of the hover car's thruster system to give him a complete answer. It's one of the super training rooms Ben created. Peter failed to notice the excitement that gleamed across Johnny's eyes as he heard about a room meant for training in their powers. When Peter looked up, it was only because of the flash of heat he felt before someone invaded his personal space. The person that had done such a thing was none other than Johnny Storm. Peter, pal buddy, old greatest friend of mine, Johnny stated as he threw an arm around Peter's shoulders. Lead me to the promised land. I don't think you can go down there, Peter stated as he brought up a video feed of the room Ben Grimm was in. The room was one of the strength rooms, showing a large orange rocky person going at it against a few drones designed by Ben and Alfred. Luke was in the control room, and Ben looked angry as he was going about destroying the drones. Johnny's face paled as he watched Ben roar while taking out the drones in his anger. Gulp, do you think we can book some time down there? Johnny asked before Peter turned back around to what he was working on. Yeah, sure thing, but think about this, Johnny hover car, Peter replied as he showed Johnny the designs he was currently working on. Okay, yeah, you're right, I can play with robots later. Wait, if you route the airflow this way you can use it to double as cooling also, Johnny stated as he began to assist Peter with the thruster designs. Jean watched stunned as she felt the wave of emotions Natasha was giving off as Gwen gave her the details of the first round of scans. Even though Natasha wasn't showing anything on her face, Jean could feel the shock and exuberation flowing off of her older sister figure in waves. As much as Jean wanted to, she kept herself from reading Natasha's mind for the answer. It's not that Jean didn't want to, but she didn't like to read the minds of people than her lovers. She would have her talk with Aurora later and then connect with her, but for now, she decided to wait since she was presently enjoying the thoughts Ben was currently projecting. Jean wanted to go explore the island, but Gwen was busy with Natasha. When she looked over to Felicia's location, Jean almost went to join the platinum blonde relaxing in the sun. But she had another idea of what to do with her time. Placing those thoughts aside, Jean began to levitate in a sitting position where she was. With a though, Jean brought out a cloth that she was currently working on. With some concentration, Jean pulled apart the cloth weave by weave as she slowly unraveled it. As she slowly worked on it, Jean's forehead slowly began to seep with sweat as her focus heightened to the max. This was a training that Natasha and Ben came up with to strengthen her fine mental controls over multiple structures. Each strand in the weave had its own tensile strength while also placed in an intricate design. This was a test of mental dexterity, and Jean was enjoying the challenge. Jean focused her mind with one hand unraveling the weave into her other hand. Jean's other hand, though, was slowly putting the cloth together back into a scarf. With minor twitches of her fingers, Jean set to her task of training while she enjoyed the sun of the island. Jean flowed back and forth in her location, making it halfway through the cloth before she felt a presence approach her. When Jean looked up from the location where she was currently floating, she found Lady Gaia standing nearby watching her as Jean's hands moved with her practice. What she did notice, though, was that there were patches of flowers behind Gaia. It was as if each step the Mother Goddess took, flowers bloomed in her wake. That was interesting, Jean thought to herself as she floated back down to the ground to show proper manners to the Mother Goddess. Mother Gaia. Jean acknowledged with a slight bow. That isn't needed, child. Tell me, what is this that you are doing with the fabric? Gaia asked. This is practice for control of strength and dexterity of the mind, Lady Gaia, Jean replied, showing Gaia what she was working on. Each strand needs its own amount of pressure while also in a complex knot. This is for me to also think through while removing the strands. And what of your phoenix flames, do you practice with those also? Gaia asked the young redhead before her. That brought Jean to a pause because even though she had a few flare-ups with that fire ability of hers, Jean wasn't sure about how to bring it back out, but what she did know was that she was missing a clue. Ben had told her it was rubbing a few air molecules together, but Jean felt there was much more to her type of flame. Would you have some advice I might be able to use, Lady Gaia? Jean asked hopefully to have more control over her powers and abilities. Normally the rules forbid one such as I to interfere with another's chosen, but since you will be sitting on the same pantheon as my own chosen, I believe a piece of small advice wouldn't be against the rules. Look inside, child, and connect with that which you were born to. Gaia stated with a smile towards Jean as her eyes twinkled. That was a puzzle for Jean because her abilities didn't show until not too long ago. With a wave of her hand, Jean placed the things she was working on aside. Connect to that which I was born to, Jean thought to herself as she settled down into a meditative position. Jean remembered a statement that Ben told her a while back while he walked her through mental defenses. The mind is the most powerful thing we could ever have in our lives, and the mindscape allows one to access their inner being. Being a telepath had always given Jean a step up in such a thing. But after setting up her mental defenses as Ben asked, Jean hadn't explored her mindscape much after sorting and placing her memories within a mental library. With a slow breath out, Jean delved into her mindscape past her barriers and into the warm and inviting library representation of her mind. Nothing was missing or changed to Jean's sense, and everything was as it had been since she was last here. Jean's mindscape was an extensive recreation of the Manhattan Library from top to bottom, but the most significant difference was the size of the books and also flying books going around. Jean smiled at the flying books representing memories while walking down the aisle towards the center of her mind. Within the center was a large circling globe. Some of it was filled in the center representing the places she visited, but some of it was blank and Jean made a mental note to fill it in more. Jean smiled at the small note, floating away before turning back towards her search. Jean wanted the location of that flame, and Gaia stated that she was born to its connection. So Jean searched out for the feeling, and right below her, a red line glowed in her path. With a smile on her face, Jean followed the red-lined path. As Jean walked along the path, she found that it leads further down into the depths of her mind than she thought it would. Along the side of her mental aisles were her memories of her childhood. Jean's early birthdays and her kindergarten years were all along the sides as she walked, but Jean ignored them as she followed the red line. Jean walked and kept on walking along the aisle as she made her way past memories that she thought long lost to her. Then, as Jean walked past the last aisle that contained her earliest memories of learning to walk, Jean found a glow lighting up from the back. Child, you have finally come to claim your birthright. A voice from beyond the glow stated to Jean as she walked towards the voice. And might I ask, who are you and why have you taken up space within me? Jean replied to the voice. My child, my name is the Phoenix, and you have been chosen to take up my mantle. The Phoenix stated as Jean walked closer towards the voice. When Jean finally approached the voice, she found a bright flame red egg sitting on top of a pedestal. What is your mantle? Jean asked as she watched the egg with trepidation. I am a gardener of the cosmos, little one. I trim the branches of dead or dying civilizations and planets, then breathe new life into planets to begin a new cycle of life. The Phoenix stated. There are aliens out in space. Jean instantly asked as the thoughts of adventure sparked within her. Yes, but that is neither here nor there. The question is, do you accept my power? Asked the Phoenix. Okay, the last question, would this take me away from my loved ones? Jean asked with her hand hovering over the egg. Once you have reached maturity with my powers, yes, there are duties that would need to be performed. I will not force you to do these things unless you have forsaken your duties once I come calling. The Phoenix stated towards Jean. Ooh, and you should hurry your advances with your mate. Gaia has stolen an advancement for her own chosen. What do you mean? Jean asked skeptically with her hand still floating above the egg. Accept my power and go take a look. The Phoenix replied with mirth in its voice. With that said, Jean placed her hand over the egg. Before she knew it, power, unlike anything Jean knew, flooded within her. On the outside, Gwen and Natasha watched as Jean was covered within a cocoon of red feathers. Elsewhere, I was flying low along the ocean with Aurora as Maya flew around us in a spiral of flames. I watched as Maya flew below Aurora to try and catch one of the leaping fish while I flew in low, wrapping an arm around Aurora's waist as we watched. This felt oddly comforting, like we were already a family watching over our little one as she got up to mischief. With Aurora in my arms, we floated for a moment while we watched Maya play with the fishes. We stayed like that for a moment before I turned Aurora around in my arms to face me. Aurora had a challenging quirk playing at her lips before I wiped it away by bringing her in for a kiss. My world exploded with colors when our lips touched. Aurora tasted like sugar, spice, and everything nice. The heady mixture of her essence within the taste of my weather goddess kiss was intoxicating. One of my hands slipped from Aurora's waist to take a nice firm hold of her perfect peach of a cheek, while the other hand went to support the leg that came up on my side. Our tongues dueled as we indulged the pleasure of the kiss we shared. Before I knew it, one of Aurora's hands wrapped around my back, pulling me closer to her. That was when the light show began between us. From my chest, golden lightning appeared to mix with the white and blue light that shone out of Aurora. I felt another connection of longing and being, but this wasn't the rush of emotions that I normally received from Jean when she connects to me mentally. I followed the connection that I felt forming within me. The connection felt like a cool spring breeze on an early morning, like the clean smell after a rainy day and the warmth that comes from the sun. Instinctually, I felt I knew who this connection would lead me to, but I had to follow it to be sure that I wasn't mistaken. I delved deeper, and when I felt like I had arrived, I found an African beauty looking right back at me with a smile on her face. Before me was a nude Aurora in all of her glory. When she looked me up and down, I came to realize that I was also all natural. Before I could say anything or do anything, Aurora was already in front of me. Aurora stood watching me as her chocolate buds slowly hardened against my chest. There was no need for words between us as Aurora picked one of her legs up, and I placed my hand around her waist for support. Our eyes held a steady gaze, but I could feel the heat coming off of Aurora's core, tempting me to sink right in. Yet, I held back as we slowly ground together in this spiritual union. Aurora's eyes went white, and they shone with an otherworldly light as I felt my own power flowed forth from me to meet her own. I felt a sense of completion before we were both ejected from the space, and we were back to the outside world. What was that? Asked Aurora as she leaned into my chest while we floated mid-air. I feel connected to you now, and not just through Maya. I believe we have a certain mother goddess to talk to, I replied back as I checked my internal chronometer, stunned that only a few seconds passed us by. Come, little one, Aurora called out towards Maya with a flourish of her hand. When Aurora flourished her hand for Maya to come over towards us from playing with the fish, I noticed a ring on her finger. When I noticed that, I looked at my own hand to find the same thing on my ring finger. On my hand was an extremely detailed ring that was ethereal. I could see it, but I couldn't feel it, and it wasn't on my skin as a tattoo. On the ring were glyphs that reminded me of the ones I looked at within Alfred's programming. The thing that set these apart was that these glyphs rotated around my finger, and when I focused on it, I felt Aurora more clearly within me. Aurora, your hand, let me see it, I stated as I brought her hand to my face to take a look, and I found the same thing. On Aurora's finger was the same intricate golden ring with the same glyphs that rotated on my own. I held up my hand to show Aurora that I had the same thing. Does this ring represent what I believe it does? Aurora asked me as she looked at the ring on her finger. I believe that it might stand for far more than you might imagine, I replied to Aurora as I went into detail about what happened when I focused on my ring. Aurora raised her perfectly arched eyebrow at me as she went over what I told her and tested the features of the ring herself. I do not believe that Mother Gaia would do this without reason. Let us go and ask her, Aurora stated as she picked up Maya and flew back towards the island. Turning around mid-air, I flew back towards the island using my gravity control right behind Aurora. We flew back over the forest, lakes, and everything in between us until we arrived back at the clearing where Gaia was standing. When we got back, everyone was standing around a large red egg. Jean was nowhere in sight, and I was beginning to get more than a little pissed off. Calm yourself, and we shall get answers, came Aurora telepathically. That new ability of Aurora could only have come from the ring, and it made me wonder what else they could do. Placing those thoughts aside, I touched down on the ground beside Aurora while greeting my mother and Rosie. Taking Maya out of Aurora's arms, I gave her to my mother and asked her to take care of Maya for a moment while I walked back to confront the Earth Goddess. I was getting a weird mix of emotions from Aurora since she was already over there talking to Gaia. Lady Gaia, you have interfered twice today, and I would like answers, I said as I walked up beside Aurora protectively. I wasn't even aware that I did such a thing subconsciously, but Gaia noticed and smiled towards us. I have only helped my chosen along her path, Gaia replied calmly to us. What path is that, Lady Gaia? Aurora asked Gaia with a slight bow of her head. You will one day walk the path of a goddess child. I have only secured your seat at his table. Gaia replied as she smiled, pointing towards me. Lady Gaia, I would like a straight answer please, I stated towards Gaia. Do you know what a ley line is, child? Gaia asked. Yes, I replied. No, answered Aurora, ley lines are lines of power that run across the earth that can be used for magic or other rituals. I told Aurora before Gaia could say whatever she had prepared. Yes, well, this island is a node, Gaia replied with a smile. And what did you do with such a node, Lady Gaia? Aurora asked. I formed the ring for the match, Gaia stated with a smile on her face like the cat that caught the canary. Was this the reason I couldn't use my abilities? I asked Gaia as I caught on to what she might have done. The ritual must have had something to do with us facing each other as equals and not powered individuals. Yes, Gaia smiled at me while I placed the parts together. These rings, my lady, what are they for? Aurora asked as she held up her hand for Gaia to see. Marvelous. It has been more than a few millennia since I have witnessed one of such power. Child, you are the Earth Mother to his Sky Father. Gaia smiled as she held up Aurora's hand to examine the ring closely. I would think this is a monumental thing to happen. So why would you set this up, Lady Gaia? I asked the Mother Goddess. Surprisingly, Gaia snorted at me like I was a fool. Aurora is my chosen, of course, I would set her up to be your first wife. You allowed me to preside over the match, and I took the opportunity to make sure my chosen wins before the mortal and the chosen of life and rebirth, Gaia returned. But before I could say anything, Aurora placed a hand on my arm. It would seem that Aurora caught a flash of my anger. I was not happy that neither Gwen nor Jean had a chance. I was not happy at all, but Aurora kept me from blowing up on the Elder Earth Goddess like I wanted to. I appreciate your assistance, Lady Gaia, but I would have liked to win on my own merit. I believe an explanation on why there is a large red egg, and one of our companions is missing are in order. Aurora stated with such a regal tone that I was stunned by her quick change in attitude. We will speak of this another time with only the two of us, my dear. Aurora spoke telepathically to me as she looked towards the red cocoon. The chosen of life and rebirth has reached for the power within, Gaia stated, but that didn't give me any comfort at all. The phoenix was more than a force of cosmic nature, and I wasn't sure about how Jean would come out of that thing. There was only hope in my heart since I kept Jean away from Charles and his tampering. Turning away from Gaia, I floated over towards my family and the large egg containing Jean. Rosie was in hushed whispers with Natasha, so I left them to what they were talking about. Gwen had a few flowers in a jar and ready to go, but she was currently standing in front of the egg with Felicia's arms around her as she waited for Jean to emerge from whatever was going on inside. My mother, on the other hand, was off to the side, reading a children's storybook to Maya as she pointed out the pictures. So I floated there next to Gwen and Felicia as we waited for Jean. Felicia's phone buzzed, which allowed me to know that the construction bots had a tower up and we now had service on the island. Although when Felicia checked her phone, her face grimaced at what was displayed there. Kingpin wants me to pay a visit to your building after you leave for his meeting, Felicia told me as she looked over the details on her phone. I won't be taking part in your takeover of Fisk Empire, Gwen stated between us. That's okay, I replied to Gwen as I placed a kiss on her forehead. Go ahead and let Fisk know you will do it for twice the normal price because of the security the building might have. Done and done. Surprisingly, he took that price, Felicia stated with some surprise in her voice. He's feeling generous because of the money he is sure to make with the NX5 distribution rights, I replied with a grin. We fell back into a companionable silence for a while. Aurora came to stand with us as we waited for Jean to finish before I could say anything, though Gaia walked up to us all with a smile on her face. Crack. My heart lodged itself into my throat as I turned around to see what had become of Jean. Before us, a roaring flame came pouring out of the feathered egg in the colors of gold and red tinged with a shade of green and orange mixed in. The flames flooded amongst us, but there was no heat to the fire. What I felt was the force of life filling the air all around us. Changing my sight, I watched as Jean rose up with the visage of the phoenix. Jean was breathtakingly beautiful. Her hair was let loose down to her waist. Flowing locks of scarlet red hair roiled around Jean with small licks of fire played at the tips. Behind Jean was a large bird of prey made of flames as the feathered egg disintegrated into the wings of fire. The bird was recognized as the phoenix spread out towering over 5 stories tall as Jean floated within its core while we watched with bated breath. Jean's eyes slowly opened, and a gasp escaped my lips and those around me as I looked into her burning red eyes. For a moment I felt a chill go down my spine because I thought the phoenix had finally come calling for its due. We stood off facing each other as I felt we were mere moments from having to fight Jean in some sick rendition of Dark Phoenix. Jean's eyes were so piercing from her position floating in the air that I felt as though she was looking into my soul. Jean surveyed us all before the flame bird flowed back into her body. Slowly I floated up towards Jean with Gwen by my side as we tried to find out who was within Jean's body. If this was the phoenix, I would fight with all my might to stop it. I understood what Gaia said and what I hoped for, but the reality could always be different. The flames of the phoenix receded back from Jean's eyes, and Gwen and I were greeted with Jean's bright emeralds. Jean held up her hand as she tested the changes to herself while we both watched her. Then Jean turned and gave us a smile, and we knew then that it was our Jean. I released the breath I didn't know I was holding. Gwen was the first to rush into Jean's opened arms as I floated in behind her, enveloping them both in my arms. Jean turned to face me as she finished a sensual kiss with Gwen. Jean leaned in, and we shared our heady kiss as we connected mentally. It would seem both Gwen and I lost our chance at being first. Jean telepathically stated to me as I indulged myself in the new taste of Jean. She tasted wild and impassioned, and every time our tongues dueled a spark of burning passion was transmitted through my nerves. We have so much to talk about. I transmitted back mentally to Jean as I held Gwen to us as we floated in the air. Yes, we do, Mr. Married Man, Jean replied with a chuckle in my mind. Married? Came a voice within our mental bond that sounded so much like Gwen. When I turned towards her, Gwen's eyes were wide with disbelief at what she heard mentally. Aurora must have felt my internal panic because, within moments, she was now floating beside the three of us. We will have to clear up a few things, I replied to Gwen as I was sure that Jean already knew from viewing the memories of the situations. Yes, it would seem that Gaia is not playing fair, Jean stated with a smile as she hung off of Gwen's back. No, she is not, but I believe that Gaia isn't the only one we have to be worried about, Aurora stated with a raised brow towards Jean. Oh, you speak of the phoenix within me? Jean asked with a smile on her lips. I don't need the phoenix's assistance for me to win. Neither did I need Gaia's. My ways would have placed me first, Aurora stated imperially. Yet you lost even though you won this round, replied Jean coolly. Aurora didn't even answer back to Jean's statement, only returned a smile at her. I could hear the metaphorical glove being thrown between the two. So would anyone like to explain what's going on with this whole married situation? Gwen asked, looking me in the eye. Well, the powers that be above us decided to intervene and place bonds of marriage between the souls, I replied watching Gwen. And what does that mean exactly? Gwen asked with narrowed eyes. They are using this chance to align themselves with Ben, Jean said with a shrug. Even if they have made a choice for us, it is still up to us to pick our path, replied Aurora as she turned back towards myself and Gwen. I concur with that, replied Jean with a nod. Only we can make our choices for ourselves. All right, fine, but know that this is not okay, Gwen stated, turned around, and flew back down to the family. So tell me, what are the plans with the island? Jean replied as she spun mid-air. This will become a nation once everything is completed, but there are things I have to do before this can become a true haven, I replied with a shrug. What are these things that need completing? Aurora asked as she rose an elegant eyebrow at me. I need to purchase a construction company, or at least partner with someone I can use to funnel the supplies needed, and then I have to make sure that the island and future generations are safe. Bolivar Trask and his entire bloodline need to be hunted down with the Sentinel program while it's still in its infancy and before the mother mold comes online, I replied seriously, and that stopped Jean from playing in the air. That's more than a little harsh, don't you think? Asked Aurora. They are the ones who create the inhibitor collars in secret and sell them to the world, Jean stated as she looked at me. They also have a secret registry of meta-humans they gained from Camp X-Ray. Jean, stop. Those are things you shouldn't share, I replied sternly as I closed down my mental shields. I'm not looking to start a war, and information like that can easily spark a world war. What is she talking about, Ben? And what is the Sentinel program? Aurora asked sternly as she got in my face. It's the reason why Trask and his company need to go, Aurora. I think that Charles has been either keeping silent about this or doesn't know about it, I replied with a shrug. Trask is either capitalizing on us or hates metas to the bone that he has gone to such lengths. This information cannot get out. Can you promise me this? I can promise, Aurora stated. I turned to look at Jean, but she was already looking at me with that piercing look on her face. You can't go around sharing these things, Jean, I said as I looked at her. keeping my mental shields in place. "We both know that Aurora is trustworthy," replied Jean. "That's beside the point. Aurora could have been the type to have gone off and brought the power of the world to Trask Industries. Then that would have created a full-blown war with a company that's creating weapons of mass destruction built to kill us all from the ground up." I replied to Jean with heat in my voice. "Aurora isn't the type," Jean replied. "But I understand this is another one of those telepath rules." "Yes, Jean, another one of the telepath rules," I replied as I rubbed my hands across my face. "Yes, Aurora, the Sentinel program is designed and built around killing metas, but it's going to go bad in all the wrong ways possible. Now I understand why Trask needs to go down, but how will it go wrong?" Aurora asked as she shook her head towards Jean's pouting face. "Machine learning and programming is very unthinking and unfeeling, but that programming will lead it to also focus on humans because, at our base, metas are just humans with powers. DNA doesn't lie, and these fools are going to create the worst version of Skynet." I replied to Aurora as I brought up what I was able to get out of Trask Industries with Natasha's infiltration. Natasha had left a flash drive that gave Alfred direct access, but after checking the company systems, we found that nothing was on the current servers about the Sentinel program. The upside to that was I now have the entire Trask family under watch with a few stealth drones. This was going to be one of the bloodiest operations, but everyone needed to die once I find Trask and his original master mold. "You are waiting to find the Elder Trask before you make your move?" Aurora asked me as she went over the operation plans I brought up for her. "Yes," I answered her. "Your plans for the parts after you trash them?" Jean asked me before Aurora could follow up, but the look on her face said that she also had the same question. "Use the data they have and the scanning tech to make improvements to our version of Cerebro. Then I plan to slag the rest. I refuse for this tech to get into the world. Those inhibitor collars are more than enough," I replied swiftly. "I think I should be there to check his mind for any hidden stash or contingency plans," Jean said with a hand on her chin. "I agree with that," Aurora said with a nod of her head. "Until then I have to make some business deals so that we can start to build up our real center of operations within our haven," I stated as I began to descend back to the ground. When I got back to the ground, my mother told me about Gwen taking the flowers she found back to the labs. That was fine because the next new bit of news stunned me. It would seem that Natasha was healed by Gaia. That could only mean that even though she was Team Aurora, Gaia would still help out. Natasha still had that stoic look on her face, but I knew how much this meant to her. I ignored that look on her face and gave her a massive hug, being sure not to crush her. Then I took her for a flight like no other. "Put me down, you!" Natasha screamed as we went supersonic. Natasha tried to blast me with one of her taser bolts, but I now had my powers, and I was immune. I chuckled at her attempt as we took a fast flight around the island. "I'm happy about your good news, Nat, I truly am," I told Natasha as I flew us back slowly. "I plan to have Dr. Kenny and Sue look me over once we return," Natasha stated from my arms. "Do I know about who your upcoming boyfriend of choice would be?" I asked, keeping the entertainment out of my voice. I knew whoever joined this family would be in for a rude awakening. "No dating for me until we survive the Chitauri invasion," Natasha replied before we touched back down to the ground. "Okay, well, since you're going back, can you call Gunny down to the enhanced lab room?" I asked Natasha as I watched her pick up Maya and head for the portal going back. After Natasha left, I looked around, and Gaia was nowhere to be found, but I wasn't going to complain about that. Rosie and my mother had their shoes off and feet in the water, so I left them alone. "Felicia, I think we should get you some powers if you're going to be the one taking down Fisk," I said as I started to type into my bracer, giving Alfred orders to get the lab ready. "I'll pass on the flying, but I will take what Underoos has," Felicia quipped. I could only chuckle at the nickname she was using for Peter. "Okay, you can't say that around the labs, or he will figure out that you're the Black Cat," I told her as I tried not to laugh. "Oh, so he does work with you guys. Oh, I bet it's Peter from breakfast this morning," Felicia said as she snapped her fingers, getting it correct with her first try. "Go easy on my brother, okay? He is only trying his best," I replied as I began to think up costume designs for Felicia. The showdown to break Fisk was this Thursday, and too many things needed to be completed. "Let's go get your powers, and then we will work on your suit and your skills." Aurora and the rest of my family stayed behind on the island. It was time to supercharge the Black Cat. Felicia was going to get a dose of normal spider formula mixed with super soldier. The unbreakable formula still caused great pain, even though it was reworked, improving the overall potency and reducing the time a person needs to be submerged. I was at the console as I talked Felicia through what the serums did to her DNA. The formula was set to latch onto her genetic markers and force their way in, while the chamber filled with Vita rays kept Felicia's health up, allowing her body to accept the change without rejection. "You know you don't have to do this," I said to Felicia as I watched her hands shake in her lap. "But I do have to do this. I want Fisk broken at my feet by my hands." Felicia replied with a swiftness I wasn't expecting from her. I watched those jade green eyes filled with steel as I looked at her, trying to figure out what's pushing her so far. "Why?" I asked, turning to face the platinum blonde before me. All I knew of Felicia Hardy was from the comics. I had to learn about her if I was going to help her further. "What?" Felicia replied, confused. "Why do you want Fisk broken, and why must you be the one to do it?" I asked, trying to prompt her to open up more about it. I watched as Felicia thought about my question for a while as we sat there. The computer pinged me, letting me know that the serum was complete, but I wasn't going to move forward without her saying anything. Felicia must have realized this, because she looked at the syringe containing the serum with longing on her face. With a few button presses from me, the serum was popped back out of sight as I waited for Felicia. That snapped her back to face me, and I could see a small spark of anger flashed across her face. "I would like to know. My father was the best infiltrator around. My mother told me he wanted out when I was younger. His cover position was working for Fisk International. A few years back, I found his journal. His last job was for Fisk, but he never came home." Felicia replied as she balled her hands into fists in her lap. "So revenge for sending your dad on a suicide mission because Fisk knew he was finished with the life." "I can dig it," I replied with a nod while bringing back up the syringe with the serum in it. Felicia held her hand for it, but I paused. "Don't allow this power to change you." With a nod from Felicia, I gave her the power to make a change. Felicia got up and dropped the bathrobe she was currently wearing before she got into the Vita chamber. Giving her a cursory glance, I smiled as I appreciated what she had on. Felicia was wearing a black sports bra with a matching pair of boy shorts that had the word BigToFu on the back. I snorted at the sight as I proceeded to get the chamber ready. The chamber is going to be held at 70% for 60 seconds, while the cheese saturates your body. Once you reach 100% saturation, we will hold it there for another 10 seconds. I told Felicia as I held the chamber open for her. With a nod in reply to me, Felicia stepped into the chamber while I went back to my control console. With steel in her eyes, Felicia closed the chamber doors. I pressed the intercom while I checked the readings on the holograms. "In 3, 2, 1. Begin," I said over the intercom as I started the procedure. "So what do you think, Gunny?" I asked the open air beside me as I watched the clock count down while keeping an eye on the vitals of Felicia in the chamber. The air shimmered, showing a tall man in his early 40s dressed in shades of dark navy blue commando gear. "That girl's got grit, kid. So tell me, what's the plan?" Gunny asked as he took the chair Felicia vacated. "Give her some money and set her up as a rich heiress gaining inheritance, and then have her use her connections and what we get from Fisk to sell the NX5, I replied. "I don't believe it will be that easy, kid," Gunny said as he rubbed at his chin. "It's never that easy, Gunny, but that's life, and for her to work out. My question is, will you have her back?" I asked as I turned towards the man. "Look, I joined up because Alan found me and said it was worth it to fight for you. The ride has been fun taking down those Friends of Humanity asshats and playing with the toys you provide, but now you want to pawn me off to watch her back. I don't know, kid. We will have to see how she does against Fisk." Gunny replied to me as he folded his arms across his chest. "Giving her a chance is all I can ask you to do," I replied to him as I turned down the chamber in preparation for releasing Felicia. Gunny went invisible instantly as Felicia made her way out of the chamber. Out of the chamber stepped a flawless beauty of power. Felicia stalked out of the chamber doing that subtle walk that I saw Natasha like to do when she was on the prowl to hurt someone. "So how do you feel?" I asked Felicia as I watched her stretch. "I'm ready to go beat my revenge out of Fisk," Felicia stated as she went down into a split. Then with fluid movements, Felicia rolled over into a flip and back onto her feet. I watched as Felicia tested a few punches and a couple of kicks while she got used to her new upgrades. "That can be arranged," I replied as I placed the plans into motion. The fastest man alive Vega HQ. It was another bright and sunny morning as I sat in my office going over my evening plans while also fleshing out the infrastructure of the island. Suddenly my office doors were thrown open with a very excited Susan Storm barging in. In her hands was one of the gold and purple plants that Gwen had brought back from the island. With a wave of my hand, I closed down the holograms I was working on as I raised an eyebrow. Susan Storm stood at a smooth 5 feet 6 inches with long flowing blonde hair. Susan was currently wearing a lab coat over a nice pair of jeans that hugged her shapely curves. "Dr. Storm, is there a need for you to come barging into my office early in the morning?" I asked as I looked her up and down. I noticed the bags under her eyes and her haggard look from being in the labs all night working on a project. Leaning back into my seat, I watched as Susan Storm paced a nice little trail in front of my desk as she put together what she wanted to tell me in her head. She paused, about to say something, but then went back to pacing. I didn't have time for this. "Dr. Storm, would you like to start now because I do have a meeting with Ben after this?" I spoke up, prompting her to start whatever she was going to present. "Oh, sorry, but this plant that Gwen brought back, do you have any more? It has progressed my research against Alzheimer's by leaps and bounds, boosting the connections between the brain cells and produced regenerative tissue. If we can synthesize more of the properties this plant produces, we can cure most of, if not all, the most hideously debilitating mental deficiencies known to man." Susan Storm rambled on a mile a minute, and the only thing that saved me was my accelerated hearing and understanding. "Okay, and why can't you use what you already have within the labs?" I asked her as I stapled my fingers together on top of my desk. "Gwen didn't bring back enough of these flowers, so I would like to go and gather more," Susan stated as she leaned over my desk in evident excitement. "Denied," I replied instantly. "The place we recover these from is protected, and I don't need the FDA killing this or the world forcing their way into the area for monetary gain. I'm not doing this for monetary gain. This is for science and the advancement of humanity. Think about the number of people we can help save with this cure." Susan huffed indignantly as if I insulted her. "As a scientist, that's your prerogative. But the world does not conform to what you would like, does it, doctor? I have to make contingencies that our discoveries or other problems don't bury us as we concentrate on bringing them to the world," I replied as I watched the emotions play across her face. Susan stood up from my desk, and I watched her pace some more as she thought about what I just said. "I can't say that I disagree with you on that one," Susan said as she paced back and forth. "I can make arrangements for you to receive more of the plants, but you have to keep it under wraps until we figure out a way to get it to market without having the entire world finding the source and destroying the ecosystem," I told her, shutting down any more of her advances for information. "I would like to make a trip to this ecosystem to see what else we could discover," Susan replied with hope in her voice. "I will think about it, doctor," I replied as I got up from behind my desk to show her the way out of my office. "Also, doctor, don't forget to show up for Alan's training session." "I already know how to use my abilities," Susan replied as she left my office. "Mind over matter, of course. That doesn't mean you won't be tested below, Dr. Storm. I refuse to allow anyone to stagnate while in my employ," I replied with a shrug. "Hey Sue, I see you're talking with the boss man." A gruff voice sounded out from the reception area. Turning to look behind Susan, I found the big orange rocky form of Ben Grimm patiently waiting for his turn near the door. "Hey big guy, how's it going?" Susan returned as she headed for the door. "It's going okay, but I'm still getting used to this new form," Ben said with a shrug of his shoulders. "Don't worry big guy, we will figure out how to change you back," Susan replied as she hugged Ben before getting in the elevator. While Susan went down in the elevator, I directed Ben towards my office, but he took a moment to look at the knives that Natasha had displayed up behind her desk as personal art. With a grunt, Ben walked into my office and I directed him towards one of the couches to the left of the room as I took a seat across from him. I don't think it will hold me," Ben stated as he looked at the couch I had directed him to use. "Don't worry, everything in here is reinforced," I replied to him with a shrug. Then with a wave of my hand, I brought up what I wanted to discuss with him. Ben stood there for a moment as he looked around for something sturdier for him to use or to stand, but with my eyebrow raised at him, Ben sat down. For a moment, I watched him hold his breath and then let it out as the couch I had him sit on didn't collapse from his weight. Honestly, I felt bad for the man, because overall every single iteration of the multiverse he was the one that got the rock powers and none of them ever got their human forms back. Well, there is that one Ben Grimm that Dr. Doom cured just to piss off Reed. That was a taking of his powers, Though and Doom did it because he could, and it was only to spit in Reed's face. This Ben would need to be cured in my life, but also be able to retain the ability to transform back, or at least use the powers in his human form. So why'd you call me up here, boss? Ben Grimm asked me from his position from the couch. I would like to know how you're doing because when I checked this morning, you had destroyed over 140 drones over 3 days. I replied as I leaned back into my chair. Sorry, I didn't know that I had destroyed that many, Ben replied sheepishly. I'm not worried about that, but I'm worried about the anger you're showing when you're inside the danger room. I replied to him as I brought up the video recording of the fights he had gone through. I watched silently as Ben roared for hours as he kept on smashing everything in his way. Then the video showed Ben beating on a few drones while they were already down. When that showed Ben covered his face with his hand in embarrassment. Yeah, I would be embarrassed if I was fighting an already dead drone in fits of anger, I quietly confirmed. I don't, that's fine, I said, cutting Ben off mid-sentence. But I will need you to go see someone about your anger. I know being a large rock guy isn't sitting well with you right now. What do you know, huh? Look at me. I'm a freak. Ben yelled as he stood up to tower over my seated form. I just sat there and watched as Ben huffed and puffed himself out. Once Ben was finished and took his seat, I waited for him to calm down. Sorry 2 held up my hand to cut Ben off as I stood myself. Ben watched me as I moved to the middle of my desk table, then pushed my seat back out of the way. Once I was sure the important stuff was out of my way, I turned to Ben as he looked at me perplexed. What happens must stay between us, deal? I asked Ben, who dumbly nodded his head. I would like a yes or no vocalized, please. Yeah, boss, sure thing. This stays between us. Ben replied slowly. With Ben's agreement, I released that tight hold I always kept on my powers. Instantly, I was a 10-foot-tall monster made of pure muscle, all while Ben watched me with his mouth hanging open. This wasn't all, though, since the strength force came with control over the earth, while the speed force gave me control over space and time. Closing my eyes, I pushed harder, summoning the earth to me as I felt the warmth flow through my skin. With a little more pushing on the strength force, I was now an 11-foot-tall monster of rock and granite with flowing veins of magma along my arms. My voice boomed from my throat, full of the power unleashed within my body. No one is a monster. There is control, and then there is a lack of control. My company is more than just releasing the cutting edge in the latest tech. What we do here is help people make peace with their powers, and then learn control. You. I said as I pointed my hand towards the now dumbstruck Ben standing before me. Must learn peace, and then we can help you with that control. Take a moment and think about it. Reed has powers that he can control. Susan has powers that she can control, and Johnny has powers that he can control. So why wouldn't you be able to control your powers? Gain your peace, and then we can work on your control. Ben stood there watching me for a moment, and then when he took a step forward, I realized what he wanted to do, so I waited for him. I was now 11 feet tall of muscle and granite just like Ben, who thought there was no one like him. I held up a rocky hand, waiting for Ben to do the same, and once his hand was up I gave him a high five, the noise of the impact of our hands like the cracking of the earth during a seismic event. Then, while I watched his face still full of amazement, I brought back a tight leash on all the power within me. As I shrunk back down to my normal height of 6 feet 6 inches, all the rock and granite that I summoned fell away, leaving smooth hot chocolate skin. Frustration hit me when my pants almost fell from my hips. That was a sign that I needed to finish the unstable molecular fabric soon because normal clothes were not going to cut it in the future. So, I want you to see a shrink to help you out, and then after that, we will work on your control. I told the big guy as he stood there gawking at me like it was the first time he saw a showgirl. Wait, can't we work on both? Ben quickly asked. No, I replied instantly. Once you're a lot calmer, you will be able to focus on what we need to do to help you regain your human form. Right now, you're going to want it too much, and that's going to make you angrier and mess up whatever we figure out about your powers. I think Susie knows a friend I can go see, Ben replied as he scratched his head in thought. Good. Sort yourself out, and then we can sort out the issue you're facing with turning back to your human shape, I replied to the big guy. Ben looked a little down before he nodded his head and went for the door to my office. While showing Ben to the door, I was greeted by 2 very unexpected visitors. Raven and none other than the White Queen herself, Emma Frost, were coming down the hallway towards my office. Well shit, I thought to myself as I watched the 2 femme fatale walk towards me. Looking down at myself, I let out a groan because I was still in my torn-up Armani suit. "What's the occasion, Raven?" I asked with a grunt as I watched them walk towards me. I watched them both carefully. Raven was on the right, wearing a nice red-colored blouse to match her hair and a matching skirt and heels, but besides her, Emma was just as I imagined her. She was wearing what could have passed as a business dress, but in all white with an overcoat. What was different wasn't the all-white. No, it was the massive tummy window in what should have been a business shirt. The shirt in question that had the open belly window still had its sleeves. The shirt wrapped tightly around her waist like a corset to hold her up her ample bust. The pants were white bell-bottoms that slightly raised to show off the all-white heels she wore. I looked at the tall blonde super hottie in front of me as she gave me her killer bedroom eyes while somehow keeping a straight face. Raven just pouted her lips. "Since you helped me in receiving a pardon, I thought I would help you with a business opportunity," Raven replied smoothly as they both walked towards me. "Yes, I'm aware of Frost Pharmaceuticals and Cold Steel contacting us recently, but if I recall I turned those down," I stated with a raised eyebrow. "What's going to change my mind?" "I believe we can arrange something to benefit us both," Emma stated as she locked eyes with me. Blue eyes met gray, and I didn't budge even when I felt a small tendril of psionic force trying to find its way through or around my mental shields. I sighed at this and almost let a frown play across my face. With a thought, I constructed a mental image of a post-it sign on the outside of my mental shield stating that only the cool kids allowed. Emma had an ever so slightly shocked expression which she quickly replaced with her cold facade. With a wave of my hands, I directed them into my office. "Drink." I offered them both. Raven walked over and poured herself and Emma a drink. Raven had a scotch while Emma had a bourbon. I turned to ignore them both, going for my personal bathroom to change into something I could relax in. Opening my personal closet, I noticed that all I had were extra pairs of suits. I released another sigh at the sight. All I wanted was a pair of nice jeans and a shirt to wear, but Natasha kept on changing out my wardrobe. "Alfred, did Natasha leave any of my jeans in here?" I asked out loud, hoping he was paying attention. I waited and waited for his response, and then Alfred finally spoke up. "Sorry, Father, I was playing with Maya with one of my little drones. From reviewing the records, I believe that Lady Natasha ordered 3 pairs of jeans for your office wardrobe and some shirts to match." Alfred informed from the overhead intercoms with a distracted quality as if he was busy. "Send me an image, please, Alfred," I asked as I began to look through the closet for the jeans and shirt. On my wrist popped up an image of Maya playing in one of the roof gardens with a few of Alfred's spider bots. Maya was swinging from one of the spider bots while the others stood guard around her. One of the smaller bots had a screen up playing Dora the Explorer. Maya was wearing a child's jumper white and a sky blue shirt underneath. I smiled while watching her sing along to the show. "Thanks, Alfred," I said as I closed down the holo video playing from the communication beads on my wrist. I had finally found my jeans and t-shirts that I was going to put on, but the shirts made me pause when I pulled one of them out. In bold stylized letters on the back was Natasha's little present. It read "If lost, return to Natasha," and then she also left a note on top of the shirts for me that also read "Don't worry, my shirt reads I'm Natasha." "Alfred, how many of these shirts did Natasha order?" I asked as I face-bombed my forehead. "All of them," Alfred replied instantly. "I have also notified her that you have received her gifts." Releasing a sigh, I went for the black polo that had Natasha's embroidered around the left bicep. On the front of the chest pocket was a lightning bolt with the words "Lightspeed" written underneath. With my shirt on, I looked over my jeans to make sure that Natasha didn't pull anything with them. Everything was good, and now it was time to go deal with the massive new problem of Raven bringing Emma Frost and her issues here. I was really starting to get frustrated with this Marvelverse, but by the grace of Stan Lee's legacy, I wasn't going to quit now. Walking back out into my office, I found Emma standing at my window overlooking the city while Raven was laid back on my couch relaxing. Pouring myself a drink, I took up a seat across from Raven. Raven, in turn, gave me a smile that sent a delightful shiver down my spine, bringing back memories of Russia. Putting those thoughts aside, I turned to the Lady of Frost drinking her bourbon overlooking my city. "So who is going to tell me the truth of why Ms. Frost is here?" I asked openly as I downed my scotch in one go. I felt another mental probe, stronger than the last, but I kept it out and left the same sign as I had up last time she tried to gain access. Placing my empty cup on the table, I leaned back waiting for either of them to break first. "I'm here to do official business." Emma began as she stood in her location, looking out upon the city. You have amassed a large fortune and great influence on the world, Mr. Blake. Whose official business, though? I replied with a small smile playing at my lips. Raven gave me a smile, while Emma kept looking over the city. I believe it would be in your best interest to form a partnership with Frost International, Raven stated as she got up to freshen her own drink. The partnership could benefit Vago Industries with access to countries and markets that you haven't yet breached. As I said earlier, I turned down a partnership before. What makes this different? I questioned as I watched the two. This comes with a recommendation to the most exclusive club in the world. Emma spoke up as she turned around. You're willing to give me a recommendation to the Hellfire Club? I asked while wiping the smile off of my face. I didn't believe that place had anything that I couldn't kill or steal for myself. I was too much the smash and take type of guy and not the sneaky type. Yes, Mr. Shaw has extended an invitation for a bishop position to start with, Emma said as she walked back towards where I was seated on the couch. The good old Hellfire Club was not only one of the most influential clubs of millionaires and billionaires, but also one of the most corrupt places to mingle. Slowly I thought about what the Hellfire Club could do for me, and as I slowly mulled these thoughts over, Emma took a seat beside Raven on the couch. I took in the sight before me and placed my schemes aside to enjoy the sight of the pair of beautiful women. How about you tell me what you would like out of these deals? I'm certain that Raven wouldn't bring you here if there wasn't something else besides a business deal, I stated as I sat up straighter in my seat. It is understood that you like to assist and give others second chances. Raven began with measured words. I would be delighted if you could extend the same offer to Emma that I received. That is something Emma could ask for herself, and the last time I checked, Ms. Frost is a free woman and isn't in the same situation as you or Raven, I replied as I placed my hands together. There is something else, and I would like to know what it is. I will not get on my knees and beg you for assistance. Emma spoke as she got up to leave. Emma, wait. Raven started rapidly as she grabbed onto Emma's wrist. I refused to debase myself with asking for assistance. Emma spat. With my fingers steepled together, I began while eyeing her. You did not beg nor did you ask. You made an offer for someone else, and then Raven asked for you. So how about you get off whatever high horse you're on, because I don't need nor am I impressed by the prissy bitch routine. And by now you should understand the mental manipulation routine you have tried isn't going to work on me. So how about you shoot straight and stop with the curveballs? Also, you can drop the act. The only reason Raven would bring you here to ask for help is that maximum firepower is necessary, I said as I leaned back in my seat, spreading my arms out across the couch. While your crass American firepower is much appreciated, what I need is something much more subtle. These opponents can't see the moves that are being made. Emma replied to me with a shrug. The sleek and rugged Mr. Todd would be great for this situation. Raven spoke up as she gave me a smile. I still don't see a reason for me to rub shoulders with these people when a sniper round could solve so many troubles for me. She sighed. Boys and their toys, Raven said as she began to transform. Crap. I need to finish the unstable molecule fabric very soon and get it updated with a shape change clothing tech from that Japanese scientist who was playing with it. The prize is a very sweetened pot. Looking back at me were two very identical versions of Emma Frost. Killer bedroom eyes and pouty lips with nothing out of place. More and more honey traps. If I didn't know how the Marvelverse liked to screw over the hero, I would jump at this chance. But I was always thinking with more than just my second head, even if I was getting so much tail thrown at me. Crap again. I was beginning to feel like Spider-Man second, coming with all these women in my life, bringing along their personal issues. Why couldn't I be more like Stark and not give a rip, or at least get more C-list of groupies? My hands were beginning to get full with all the badass women popping up. I don't share, period. And are you not involved, Emma? I asked the duo before me. The last time I checked the news was all up into that little fit about your latest boy toy. Raven then transformed into a guy and back into Emma's twin, all the while smiling at me. Well, I guess that answers the question about who Emma was dating. But I wasn't so certain about adding another lady to my already, growing situation. Since you have been in the club the longest, there might be a few people I would like you to get information on for me. I started off slowly. Here, Raven said as she slid a USB stick across the table towards me. It would seem that the both of you came prepared, I replied with a raised brow while plugging the USB stick into the table before us. Preparation keeps our species from becoming savages, Emma said, placing one leg over the other. So tell me, how are you able to block my mental examinations? So are you going to admit you're wrong for trying to get into my mind without my consent? I asked as I went over the information on my Sanskrit communication bead. You can't prove that it was me, nor can you prove that I'm a mutant, Emma replied smoothly. The proper term around here is metahuman. I replied offhandedly as I looked over the file of Edward Buckman. Now that I had a lead to get close to this asshole, I wasn't going to let it slip through my grasp. Emma scoffed at my correction, but when she noticed me placing down the things at which I was looking, she met my eyes. This homo superior bullshit and mutant bullshit needs to be left at the wayside. If you want me to cooperate with you, then you need to understand that I fight for equality, not for superiority. And what makes you think we will gain equality? Even with your grandstanding, the president still backtracked on his stance. Emma pointed out with a smirk playing on her lips. Monkey with a banana is what he is, I replied, brushing aside the president and his bullshit. Soon, I will have a monopoly over things that the world can't live without, and I will force their hands on the issue of equal rights. You speak of this as if it is a foregone conclusion? Emma asked, but before I could respond, Raven spoke up. Ben is writing a line between Eric and Charles. Raven spoke up in my defense before I could say anything. I have witnessed his willingness to do what needs to be done, while also not taking things beyond a limit. For a moment, I watched as Emma sat there thinking about what Raven told her while I kept my own mouth shut. The deal with Frost International. Emma prompted me as she pushed her own agenda. What's in the deal for me? I know you're going to gain access to medical technology that will revolutionize the world, but I haven't heard anything being offered to me besides money. I replied as I got up to pour myself another drink. I would think that Raven transforming into me would clue you in on the prize, Emma said, and I could hear the mirth in her voice. Okay, that's an interesting proposition, but again, why? And don't tell me it's because you have fallen for me, because we both know that's not true. I replied as I poured myself some scotch. Am I not appealing enough for you? Emma asked as she got up from the couch to approach me at the bar. I looked from her long lean legs to the flawless skin of her torso to her pouty lips. As my gray eyes met her blue orbs, I was greeted with sharp intelligence. Standing at the bar, I allowed Emma to take my tumbler out of my hands and watch as she drained the glass dry. Raising an eyebrow, I watched and waited. Emma walked back towards the couch where Raven sat. Raven leaned back in her seat as Emma walked up behind the couch to lean over Raven. Slowly Emma leaned down towards Raven as she slowly ran her hands down the perfect copy of herself. Then as Emma's hands reached Raven's chest, I noticed the pinch as I heard Raven release a moan which was, in turn, cut off with Emma's lips on her own. Walking back over to my seat, I sat down and watched the show play before me. Emma and Raven slowly shared passionate kisses as I watched them. Emma came up from the kiss, locking steady eye contact with me as she kissed her way across Raven's exposed throat and worked her hands under the open corset shirt that Raven copied. Ignoring the two, I went back to look over the information that was given on the USB stick. While I was doing that, I got a ping from Peter sending me the work on the hovercar, and I almost skipped in happiness. Then I noticed the use of tachyon particles. That would need to be changed. It wouldn't do for some smart hot rider to blast himself into space with no way to return. I heard a disgruntled snort which caused me to look up at the two no longer in their make-out session. Yes. You're not making this easy on me, you know, Emma said with her arms folded across her ample chest. I have a genius, cosmic power, and Mother Nature itself in my circle of women, and with an infiltration expert being mixed in with recent events, I replied with a shrug. You're missing a business expert, Emma said with a small smirk on her lips. I'm doing well enough on the business end of things. Ben, can you not be so difficult, please? Raven said from her spot on the couch. After messing around with them for this long, it was time to get back to making money and moves. Fine, we have an experimental vehicle in the works, so we will need an automotive company that's leading in electric motors, but also failing. This way, we can snatch the majority in shares or buy it outright. I replied, thinking about being the sole company to introduce hovertech besides what SHILD has. Tesla Motors, I already own 17%, but they haven't been much of a return on investment. Emma replied instantly with a snap of her fingers. That couldn't be. Doesn't Elon run that company? I asked because I heard that name a few times. Genius, yes, but doesn't know how to run an automotive company properly, Emma replied with a shrug. Okay, then get us more than 50% controlling interest, and we will return to the discussion about you being my lady, I said as I got up from my seat to prepare to go see Uncle Ben and then go out for a haircut. Raven, Show her out please, and no stopping to go play with the toys. So tell me what you think. Raven asked, turning towards her companion. I know you tried to get into his head. Who taught him how to shield his mind? Emma asked in return. That I would not know. I'm certain that he doesn't allow Charles into his head, replied Raven as she tilted her head to the side. To answer your question, I now know what you're after, Emma said with a smile towards her companion. So you felt it too? Asked Raven as she drew closer to Emma. All that tightly controlled power coiled behind a force of will I have never encountered before, Emma replied breathily. And I want some. I thought you might say that. After leaving them to do whatever they did, I made my way to the garden to have lunch with the family. This time I had made sure that Aunt May brought Uncle Ben because I had a lot of questions for him about his sister. When I was younger and first met Peter, I had learned that his mother, of course, was Mary Parker, scientist out of MIT, but there was no Richard Parker. Mary was Uncle Ben's younger sister and was on the fast track for greatness. Only that greatness was sidetracked when she became pregnant while getting her doctorate. Again, it was things like these that had me shake my head at the sheer craziness of the multiverse, because no matter what parent combination that Peter gets, he always ends up with Uncle Ben and Aunt May in the end. When I got topside to the garden with a picnic table that contained lunch, I was greeted with the sight of everyone here. Just great. I wanted some schmoozing time with Uncle Ben to pick his brain, and everyone was here joining us. Maya was sitting on Aunt May's lap with my mother and Aurora close by, so I took my seat in between Laura and Peter, forcing the two lovebirds apart. Instinct told me that I was about to get gutted, so before anyone could react, I went for the nerve in Laura's forearms that pushed the claws out. Fighting with Logan taught me a thing or two about his physiology, so with a quick jab, I disabled her claws before they even came out. With Laura's claws stunned and forced to stay inside, I slid her over on the bench as I sat between the two. I call older brother dibs, I quipped as I tossed an arm around Peter and pulling the tray of fries away. So tell me, Petey Pie, what's the plan for date night? Peter's cheeks went red as I watched him, all the while munching away at the fries I liberated from his tray. Slowly Peter floundered in his seat for a bit before I felt it was time to end my fun. There is a roller derby that you can go to? I offered Peter with a shrug. Where is that? Peter asked, perking up with a thoughtful look on his face. Brooklyn, near Atlantic Avenue. I told him, bringing up the information on the derby. Sweet, Peter exclaimed as he brought my hand with the communication beads closer to himself so that he could get a better look. Taking off the Sanskrit beads, I gave them to Peter as I took the second burger that he hadn't even started yet. With everyone here, I wasn't able to ask Uncle Ben the questions I wanted to, so I relaxed and enjoyed my lunch. For the rest of the time I had here in the garden, I played with Maya. After leaving the garden, I made my way towards Harlem to see its soon-to-be hero Luke Cage. With a smooth 40-minute ride, I was finally at Pop's barbershop. Walking up to the door with Alan by my side, I was greeted with the sight of Luke sitting in one of the free chairs while Pops was in the other, and Bobby was in his usual seat by the window hovering over the chessboard. Pop's barbershop was one of the longest clean businesses here in Harlem, New York. Pops had kept his business as the neutral grounds even when all the gang violence made the block hot. Henry Hunter grew up on the streets but was locked away when he was younger, never being able to meet his child, and still can't find him to this day. But he did turn his life around when he was released from jail. What Henry did when he was released was to open this barbershop of his. He kept it as neutral ground ever since, and somewhere along the way he gained the nickname Pops. For me, Pops was another Uncle Ben, a great man with a great soul with words that impact far beyond the moments that they are shared. Pop's quote was never backward, always forwards. Pop was another of the great men I would make sure swerves past what fate has in store for him, and hopefully, stick him and Uncle Ben on Eden and away from all this crazy. Good afternoon, folks, I said as I held the door for Alan to follow me inside. There was no reason for him to stand outside and look like a G-man. Hey, young buck. Hey, kid. Hey, kid. Alan, take a seat and stop looking like a G-man, I told him as I sat in Pop's chair. Pop's a low fade to clean me up. No problem. So Ben, hot date tonight? Pops asked as he flapped out the cape. With the cape around my neck and front, I slowly thought about how to reply as Pops got his tools together. Yeah, I do actually. I even have to wear a nice fancy suit, I replied as I looked Luke in the eyes. A suit? Pops hummed behind me as he started the clippers. She must be special if you're going to wear a fancy suit. Yeah, gotta dress fancy when going out on the town with my lady, I replied, then added. What about you, Luke? You tried out that fancy suit my designer got you. Pops paused over my head as he realized what I was saying, but then he proceeded as if there was nothing amiss. There has been no need, the block's been chilly, Luke replied as he leaned forward in his seat. Not for long, Luke, the winter always calls for heat, I replied with a shrug. Bobby perked up from his position by the window as he was playing chess with Alan. How much fun are you going to have on this date? The biggest man in New York is hosting, and it's going to be talked about for months, I replied as Pops turned my chair to get a better cut. The party will extend to Harlem with its main party man partied out. Understood, young buck, understood. Bobby returned as he moved his rook. Luke sat in his seat, thinking. After that, I sat and enjoyed my haircut, pleased that everyone now knew that the block was going to change with the fall of Fisk. With a fresh cut, Alan and I made our way back towards the Vega building. Are you going to join us, Alan? I asked my driver as I looked out the window while we drove through New York. No, I don't think I will. I hung up the need for adrenaline before you found me on the streets. Gunny can handle it with that team you have him going around with, Alan replied from his driver's seat. Plus, I believe it is my night to babysit the little miss. And I wouldn't miss that for anything. Okay, I replied as we pulled into the garage of the building. Once the car was parked, I left Alan for the elevator that went down into my personal labs. The labs in the basement and below had their separate entrance and exit, which was an idea I pulled from Batman and Wayne Towers. First, I made a stop at the danger room to pick up Felicia, since that was where my Sanskrit beads showed as her location. When I entered the danger room, I found her down in a split as she stretched out her muscles. Standing at the viewing port, I watched as Felicia went through her routines before launching into dodging the projectiles launched from the walls. While I watched her go at it, I walked up to the control console and started to up the tempo. Felicia kept up the pace as I slowly ramp up the danger. After 30 minutes of all-out action, I noticed the first signs of sweat. I turned the system off. With everything turned off, I walked into the room. Felicia was gathering her things, but I stopped to take a moment and drink in the sight of her. Felicia was wearing a pair of black Lululemon yoga pants with a white stripe line going down from her hip on the outside of each of her legs. She was also wearing a medium-sized t-shirt over her black sports bra. On the front of the shirt was her moniker of a black cat. So are you ready for tonight? I asked as I helped Felicia pack the rest of her things. Yeah, I believe I'm ready for answers, Felicia replied as she picked up her bag. With a nod of my head, I took the bag from her hand and then walked Felicia out of the danger room towards the showers. When we arrived at the locker room door on the other side of the danger room, Felicia turned as she wrapped her hands into my shirt, pulling me towards her. For a moment, we stood there together. My fingers slowly played through her hair as Felicia looked up into my eyes. I could see the slight flush on her cheeks as I felt her buds harden against my chest. Slowly I leaned into her as I stepped in closer. With our lips barely centimeters apart, I could feel the rapid thrum of her heart speeding up. With my hand within Felicia's hair, I pulled her in, claiming her lips for myself. The kiss was raw, hungry, and filled with want. Before I knew it, I dropped the bag in my hand as I picked Felicia up, posting her against the wall. Felicia grunted as her back hit the wall as I pushed myself into her more. When we came up for air, Felicia laughed at our position with her legs wrapped around my hips. With a quick tug, the black shirt she wore in the danger room was ripped apart, leaving her large knockers in the sports bra showing as her buds tried to poke through the fabric. A pinch to her bud caused her to start a moan, which I silenced as I claimed her lips again. Felicia's fingers dug into my back as she pulled outwards, ripping off my shirt. Pulling back, I chuckled at the display of my shirt in both of her hands as she gave me the oops face. With a shrug of my shoulders, I pulled Felicia off the wall onto myself. With Felicia in my hands, I kicked open the door leading into the locker room. Oh, that looks exciting, but don't you think you should wait until after we get back before you enjoy your victory meal? Growling, I turned to the sight of a half-naked Salt in the locker room. Standing at one of the lockers, Salt was topless with combat pants on. Come on, boss man, you can pump her guts after we get back. Just the tip. Before we go. Felicia whispered into my ear. Girl, I know what the tip leads to. Salt replied as she pulled her shirt over her head. It starts with the tip and then a few strokes, and next thing you know, you're getting your cervix blown out while screaming to high heaven. Not helping Marine, I said to the mean-spirited woman. Doesn't matter, boss man, if I had to turn down schlong for my husband to be here tonight. You can turn down some coochie and get your head in the game before the big show. Salt replied as she came over to stand next to us. This time Felicia growled at Salt, which in turn got a shrug out of the female Marine. This time Salt just held up her cybernetic left arm that we installed for her and waved her hand in a hurry-up motion for us to move along. With a sigh, I reluctantly put Felicia down, but not before pulling her in for one last toe-curling kiss. Felicia was pulled in tight to my body as I palmed her cheeks, firmly holding her a few inches off the ground. After a while, I placed a thoroughly kissed and flushed Felicia back down. Turning, I gave Salt a nod, who in turn gave me a raised eyebrow as her eyes lowered to my hardened package poking out before me. With a nod to Salt, I turned around and walked away to get my own cold shower. Peter was super excited to go on a date. It had been a while since it was just him and Laura. The last time they were together, almost everyone was over to hang out in the training rooms, now though they were on a date to the roller derby. Laura was wearing her typical black, but it still took his breath away. Peter himself was feeling dashing in a new pair of jeans that Natasha had gotten him when she found out that he had oversized clothes. The shirt was another one that Natasha had gotten him, but for some reason, the shirt's decal said "if lost return to Natasha." Natasha had even left a note that said her own shirt said she was Natasha. That was always a paradox to Peter. Natasha was one of the nicest people he met, just like his Aunt May or Auntie Judith. But with a turn, Natasha easily becomes a drill sergeant in the training room. Putting those thoughts aside, Peter held the hand of Laura as they entered the roller ring. They were enjoying the derby when Laura went rigid, pulling Peter's attention towards her. Before he could ask what the issue was, though, his spider sense went off. As he looked around to figure out what was happening and where the danger was coming from, Peter spotted a group of military types from the way they were moving in the crowd. Peter had remembered a lesson from Natasha on how to get out while in a crowd and also how to use them as a cover while making his escape. Laura was still rigid, and Peter did the only thing he could think of, and that was to kiss her. Instantly Laura relaxed into the kiss, but as quick as she relaxed, Laura was back on guard, pushing him away. "We need to leave," Laura said with urgency in her voice. "So going to tell me why the G-men are here?" Peter asked as they made their way down the bleachers towards a quick exit as they mingled within the crowd. "They are here for their escaped experiment," Laura replied as she sniffed the air, then directing Peter along another path. "Oh, so they aren't here for an autograph?" Peter quipped as he ducked around a corner. "Why would they want an autograph?" Laura asked, confused. "Honestly, I don't know. Not many people know I'm the Webslinger," Peter replied as he looked around for any followers. With no followers in sight, Peter and Laura mad dash for the back exit on the second floor. Peter and Laura made it out of the garage exit as they walked steadily through the parked cars. Laura came to a rigid stop, because before her was Kimura. Laura flew into a rage and attacked. Peter wanted to stop her, he really did, but without his web shooters he had no way to assist. "Ah, my little bitch is back," Kimura said as she pulled her hand back, and then bringing it forward in a devastating punch into Laura's face, knocking her aside. "And who are you?" "I'm her boyfriend," Peter spoke up with his chest puffed out. "Ah, she thinks she is a person," Kimura said as she pulled out a 4-foot-long modified taser. Walking over to where Laura was recovering, Kimura brought the weapon down, shocking Laura. "You're nothing but the animal I raised. You kill who I say you kill, and you shaboink who I tell you to shaboink." Before Peter knew better, his body was already moving against his will. No, it was moving with his will to rescue his girlfriend. Peter knew that Laura was not going to be any help with the number of volts running through her body. One of the things that Peter had discovered while sparring with Laura was that even though she could heal, blunt force damage and electrical damage to the nerves always took the longest for her body to shake off and recover. That's what he needed to do, get the big lady off balance and get that weapon out of her hands. Peter's first lunge was to the nearest soldier to his left. With swift and daft movements, Peter was able to disarm the guy and used him as human ammo. With a toss, Peter threw the soldier over towards his friends. With the soldiers scrambling, Peter launched himself at the wide-open Kimura. Peter wanted to hit Kimura with everything he had, but he couldn't. Killing was not his way, no matter how angry he was right now. With a savage swing, Peter went for Kimura's head to push her off balance and to get her away from Laura. Before his fist impacted on the side of Kimura's face, his spider sense went off, but it was too late. With a resounding crack, his fist broke on Kimura's face. Peter could only look down at his hand, stunned. Yet, his spider sense forced his body to move up and back to dodge a kick aimed for his ribs. "Not bad, kid, that hit had a little power behind it. Now I will have to take you back to the facility with me," I'll let my little pet watch as I kill you slowly in front of her. Better, I can dose her and have her kill you herself. Kimura said with sadistic glee dripping in her voice. Peter was more than shocked by what he was hearing, but he had to keep moving. His spider sense screamed to him as he dodged more soldiers coming at him. Use the gas, you fools. Kimura yelled as she pulled on her own gas mask. Shit. Peter thought to himself as he bolted to go and get help, but it was too late. His spider sense flared to life one more time as he jumped out of the way, only to get captured by a net. When he turned to follow where the net was shot from, he found the other end in Kimura's hands. Before he could muster his strength to rip out of the net, Peter was charged with electricity as high voltage was pushed through the net. The last thing Peter saw before passing out was the resigned expression on Laura's face before she was also shocked in the net holding her captive.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.